Hey guys, imagine this. You're a Native American woman centuries ago, deep in the wilderness. No epidural in sight. Just you, a brook, and maybe a raccoon eyeing your lunch. About to pop out a baby like it's no big deal, while the rest of the world thinks childbirth is a spa day gone wrong. Yeah, buckle up, because we're diving into the wild, absurd, and brutally real ways women gave birth in Native American times, where survival was the ultimate flex. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Picture this, folks. It's the 1600s and you're a Mohawk woman waddling through the forest, your belly swollen like a overripe pumpkin, and society's idea of maternity leave? Ha! Just you, solo, building a makeshift hut by a stream, because apparently privacy was the original birthing suite. No Netflix, no ice chips, just mats, some dried provisions, and the soothing sound of water that might drown out your screams. Or not. Adrian van der Donk, that nosy Dutch observer, scribbled about how these women departed alone to a secluded spot near a brook, prepping their shelter with whatever they could drag along, awaiting delivery without a soul around. Sick from childbirth? Rarely, he says, no inconveniences at all. Oh sure, buddy, because pushing out a human in the wild sounds like a walk in the park. But here's the irony. Most of these accounts come from men who wouldn't know a contraction if it slapped them with a wet fish. Men weren't even allowed near the birth scene in most tribes. Smart move, ladies, keeping the clueless out of the splash zone. Yet, scholars reckon many first peoples shared vibes, family and community dipping in, but not like today's baby showers with cake and games. No, this was raw survival mode, laced with beliefs that make modern OBGYNs roll their eyes. Take the Cherokees. Oh, the Cherokees and their food taboos. Pregnant? Skip the raccoon meat, or your kid might turn sickly, or, heaven forbid, drop dead. Pheasant? Same deal. Speckled trout? Boom, birthmarks galore. And black walnuts? Say hello to a baby with a schnoz like a totem pole. Neckerchiefs? Strangle that umbilical cord in spirit. Lingering in doorways? You're begging for a labor that drags like a bad date. These weren't whims. They were survival hacks passed down. Because in a world where famine, raids, and wild beasts lurked, every edge counted. Expectant moms and dads washed hands and feet daily. Hygiene ritual or spirit cleanse. Both, probably, with medicine men chanting rites to ease the push. As birth neared, rituals ramped up. James Mooney, that 19th century anthropologist, caught wind of a Cherokee scare tactic. A female relative yelling, "Listen, you little man, get up now at once. There comes an old woman. The horrible old thing is coming, only a little way off. Listen, quick, get your bed and let us run away." You? Then flip it for a girl. Little woman and your grandfather. Absurd? Totally. Effective? Who knows, but imagine the adrenaline. Baby's out before grandma's ghost shows up. And drinks? Mohican root bark brew or Cherokee wild cherry infusion to kickstart contractions. No epidurals, just nature's kick in the gut. But solitary? Not always. Midwives, wise women, elders, grandmas, often stepped in. Men banished like bad luck. Labor positions? Standing, kneeling, squatting, anything but lying down. Because, as one Hopi tradition quipped, if you lay down, the baby will never come out. Gravity's your midwife, folks. Babies plopped onto leaves below. No catcher needed. The earth welcomed them with a thud, stimulating that first cry like a rustic pat on the back. Post-birth, plunge the kid into the river daily for 2 years, Cherokee style, to build strength. Lieutenant Henry Timberlake noted it made Cherokee kids ricket-free and deformity-proof. Exaggerated? Maybe, but these women bounced back fast thanks to killer conditioning from hauling water, grinding corn, dodging arrows. Complications? They happened. Hemorrhage, infection, the works. But survival was the name of the game. No maternity wards, just sheer grit. Now, let's zoom to the Navajo, where pregnancy was a spiritual rodeo. The blessing way ceremony? 9 days of pampering the mom-to-be, cleansing, grooming, gifting, nourishing, ending in an all-night no-sleep ritual greeting the dawn. Women circled her, rubbing her body, feeding sacred foods, singing the creation song of changing woman. Prohibitions galore. No crossing legs, no tied scarves, no sex. Keep that baby visualizing good vibes only. Walk tons to widen hips. Keep baby small. Dads. Wash up daily. No tying animals lest the womb knots up. Herbs. Black cohosh. Red raspberry leaf. Partridge berry. The pharmacy was the prairie. Birth? The one who holds, that's the midwife, guiding with ropes from rafters, squatting blocks, stakes to push against. Smoke baths from laurel leaves relax the perineum, blown gently or squatted over. Counterpressure? Belts pulled tight during contractions. Music? Gourds rattled, songs chanted, sympathy groans from attendants. Babies rubbed with ashes or fats, swaddled tight, nursed pronto. And Sacagawea? Lewis and Clark's journals spill on her tough labor. Rattlesnake rattle bits in water hastened it. Worthy of future experiments, Lewis mused, skeptical as ever. But hey, it worked, or coincidence? You decide, drop a comment if you've got a wild birth remedy story from your family tree. What time is it where you are, and does this make you grateful for modern meds? Let's keep this conversation going. Hope? Solitary births sometimes, but many tribes rallied women assistance. Kickapoo let men peak, rare flex. Inuit and Algonquian, village births in homes or ceremonial huts. Mi'kmaq and Bella Coola, woods or water's edge, nature's delivery room. Midwives, Inuit cord mothers, universal midwiwin for medicine folk. Mobility was key, walk, strut, crawl, sway, lean, dance the baby down. No flatbacks, that's for the lazy or the clueless. Fires lit, water warmed for poultices, oils for massages, herbs for everything, wild yam for cramps, black haw for hemorrhage, cotton root for placenta issues. Absurdity? Bearing placentas toward evil, Navajo style, or umbilical cords for traits, Shoshone way. Moms lived alone with newborns a month to bond, no red meat for weeks. Cradle boards? Backpacks for babies, letting moms resume grinding, weaving, surviving. Pain of it all? Imagine no antibiotics, no C-sections, just you versus nature's roulette. One wrong infection, and poof, gone. Yet these women thrived, populations grew, cultures endured till colonizers crashed the party. Ironic, right? Europeans gawked at painless births, but missed the grit, the loss, the sheer will to persist. Fast forward hints, modern indigenous midwifery revives this, blending old wisdom with new tech, fighting disparities where native moms face triple mortality rates. But that's for later parts. Stick around. What shocks you most so far? Comment your thoughts. Maybe share if your ancestors had similar wild traditions. Let's unpack this nightmare history with a smirk, because laughing at the absurdity beats crying over the pain. Now, delving deeper into specific tribes, let's hit the plains, where ceremonies involved feathers, pipes, drums, sacred as heck. Women surrounded by kin, community support like a village hug. But with stakes high, one bad winter, famine hits, pregnancy turns perilous. Picture a Lakota woman, belly full, avoiding harsh weather, visualizing strength while her man prays to spirits. Labor? Chants invoke ancestors, herbs like broom snakeweed speed things. Baby out, welcomed with songs, but survival? Harsh. Infants plunged in snow-melt streams, toughens them up, or so belief goes. Absurd. Bury cord under a tree for growth, or in dirt for earth connection. Pain, untold, hemorrhages untreated, infections rampant, yet resilience shown. Southwest vibes, herbs galore, prayers to fertility deities, Pueblo moms and kivas, sacred spaces, symbolic tools, feathers for spirit calls, plants for ease. Elders guide, midwives hold space. Ironic twist, colonizers called it primitive, yet their own births? Leeches, bloodletting, talk about absurd. Northwest coast, elaborate, songs, dances, masks, regalia. Whole community celebrates, but underlying terror, raids, diseases lurking, birth a blessing, but vulnerability peaks. Eastern woodlands, nature integrated, gifts to spirits, deep reverence, pregnancy, walk forests, eat specific berries, avoid taboos like the plague. Labor, Squat by trees, lean on branches, gravity plus grip. Postpartum, isolation for purification, then reintegration with feasts, but survival's bite. High infant mortality from elements, no vaccines. Sarcasm alert. Thanks, history, for making today's C-section seem luxurious. Engaging you. If you could time travel, would you witness a traditional birth or no bout? Comment below, include your location, maybe Australia's Midnight Crew or Europe's Dawn Patrol. Retention hack. Tease Part 2's deep dive into colonial disruptions, where absurdity amps up with forced assimilations. But, for now, linger on the beauty amid brutality. These women weren't victims, they were warriors, birthing nations in the face of chaos. Cherokee again, Mooney's fright ritual, but imagine the laughter post-birth, baby safe, community tight. Mohican brews, Hopi solos, each tribe's flavor of fierce. Navajo's no-sleep nights, bonding bonanza, tales spun till sunup. Inuit cord mothers cutting ties literally, symbolically. Anishinabeg Midewiwin healing with herbs, chants, absurd beliefs. Like Europeans thinking leeches cure everything. Pot, kettle, pain, real, long labors, no painkillers, but herbal allies, pennyroyal, bayberry. Survival's irony. These primitive ways often safer than early colonial meds. Modern echo. Indigenous midwives like Nicole Gonzalez blending old with new, fighting racism in healthcare, but historical nightmare. Forced sterilizations, boarding schools severing knowledge. Sarcastic nod, thanks, progress, for improving what worked. Viewer call, what's your take on herbal remedies versus modern drugs? Comment, subscribe, epic saga unfolding. Let's honor the pain, mock the absurdity, celebrate the survival. More tribes await. Shoshone's month-long mom-baby retreats, dietary no-nos. Visualize, new mom, baby strapped, back to fields, resilient AF. Postpartum customs, naming ceremonies days later, spirits invoked. Protective rituals, placenta burials warding evil, cords for traits, ambition via specific spots. Other absurdities, avoid red meat, plunge daily, builds character, or hypothermia. Ironic, Europeans noted quick recoveries, envied yet labeled savage. Timberlake's memoirs, Cherokee kid strong from rituals. Exaggerated, perhaps, but truth and conditioning. Dive into Inuit, birth in igloos, warm furs, midwives guiding. Algonquian, ceremonial huts, smoke baths. Mi'kmaq woods births, water's edge serenity, or mosquito hell. Bella, Kula, similar, nature's embrace. Mobility mantra, move to birth, stasis for fools. Devices, ropes, blocks, stools. Low-tech genius, fires for warmth, teas for strength. Musical aids, gourd-shaking rhythm, chant-sinking breaths. Sympathy sounds, attendants groaning along, solidarity or comedy. Babies earthbound, stimulated by drop. Rubbed vigorous, fats or ashes, natural lotion. Swaddled quick, nursed immediate, bonding instant. Herbs list, licorice, sumac, yam, nature's toolkit. Sacagawea's rattle tail, expedition journals, skeptical Lewis, but effective. Folk medicine win. Comment if snakes freak you or fascinate. Where from? Retention. Part 1's rap teases intertribal variations. Colonial clashes ahead. Word count hits. Engrossed yet? Hey guys, welcome back to our wild ride through the absurd, gritty, and downright awe-inspiring world of childbirth in Native American times. If you thought Part 1 was a roller coaster, solitary forest births, raccoon meat taboos, and babies plopped onto leaves like nature's own delivery service, then strap in, because Part 2 is about to crank the chaos up a notch. We're diving deeper into the tribal variations, the spiritual circus, and the colonial curveballs that made birthing a baby feel like surviving a bear attack while reciting poetry. Picture this, a Lakota woman on the plains, wind howling, her community chanting to spirits, while some European explorer nearby scribbles, "These savages birth with ease." Oh honey, let's unpack that delusion with a smirk and a side-eye. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from, and what's the wildest birth story you've heard from your own family's past? Let's keep this saga interactive and dive into the next 2,000 words of historical madness. We left off with tribes like the Cherokee scaring babies out with ghost stories and Navajo moms enduring 9-day spiritual marathons. Now, let's swing to the Great Plains, where the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Sioux were birthing under starlit skies with rituals so intense they'd make a modern doula faint. Pregnancy wasn't just a physical grind, it was a spiritual gauntlet. A Lakota woman, belly round as a full moon, didn't just eat for two. She prayed for two, walked for two, and dodged a laundry list of taboos longer than a buffalo stampede. No touching dead animals, or the baby might inherit a corpse's bad vibes. No looking at a lightning storm, lest the kid come out jittery. And don't even think about tying a knot, ropes, braids, anything, because that could tangle the umbilical cord faster than you can say, bad omen. Absurd? Sure, but when your survival depends on the spirits not throwing a tantrum, you follow the rules. Women prepared by visualizing strength, sipping teas brewed from broom snakeweed or sagebrush to ease labor's kick. Husbands? They weren't just chilling. They prayed, fasted, and avoided hunting certain animals to keep the cosmic balance. Comment if you think you'd survive these spiritual gymnastics. What time is it where you are? When labor hit, the Lakota didn't mess around. The woman often retreated to a special lodge. Think a teepee decked out for the main event, not some cozy Airbnb. Female kin and midwives, called Winyan Wakan, or sacred women, surrounded her, chanting to Wakan Tanka, the Great Spirit, for a smooth delivery. No sterile gloves here, just hands washed in sacred water, maybe a sprinkle of sage smoke for good measure. Positions? Squatting or kneeling, gripping a rope tied to the teepee's frame, or a sturdy pole driven into the ground. Gravity was the MVP, folks. The baby came out, often caught in soft hides or, dropped onto a bed of grass or leaves. That first cry, no doctor's slap needed, the earth's chill did the trick. Post-birth, the placenta was buried with care, often under a tree to tie the child's spirit to the land. Ironic twist, while Europeans were bleeding patients to balance humors, Lakota midwives used herbs like yarrow to staunch bleeding, probably saving more lives than those quack doctors. Want to weigh in? Drop a comment. Would you trust a yarrow poultice or run screaming to a hospital? Now, let's hop to the Cheyenne, where childbirth was less a medical event and more a community festival, with a side of existential dread. Pregnant women were pampered but also burdened with rules. No eating heart meat, might make the baby too bold. No weaving tight patterns, could weave a tough labor. The Cheyenne believed the baby's spirit was already vibing in there, so moms whispered stories to the womb, shaping the kid's character before it even took a breath. Labor time? The woman was surrounded by her female posse, sisters, aunts, grandmas, singing songs of courage, rattling gourds, and burning sweetgrass to keep evil spirits at bay. The midwife, often a revered elder, guided with a calm that belied the chaos. Pain relief? A brew of wild licorice or choke cherry bark, sipped slowly to dull the edge. The baby emerged, was swaddled in soft buckskin, and named in a ceremony days later, often tied to nature or a vision from the parents. But here's the kicker. Cheyenne moms were back on their feet fast, not because they were superhuman, but because survival didn't pause. Haul water, tan hides, dodge raids, life didn't care about your postpartum glow. Sarcasm alert. Thanks, nature, for the 0-day maternity leave. What's your take? Could you bounce back like that? Comment your thoughts and tell me where you're tuning in from. Let's pivot to the Southwest, where the Pueblo peoples turned childbirth into a sacred art form, but with a side of what the heck rituals. A Zuni woman, for instance, spent her pregnancy in a whirl of ceremonies, offering cornmeal to the dawn and avoiding anything stuck, like sitting in doorways or tying hair too tight, lest the baby get stuck in the womb. The kiva, that underground ceremonial chamber, sometimes doubled as a birthing space, its walls echoing with songs to the Earth Mother. Midwives used tools like smooth stones for massage or wooden stakes for the mom to grip during contractions. Herbs? Oh, they had a whole apothecary. Datura for pain, though it could make you see spirits or hallucinate a buffalo. Red raspberry leaf for uterine strength, and juniper for cleansing. The baby was welcomed with a ritual bath in warm water infused with cedar, then rubbed with corn pollen for blessings. But the pain of survival? Brutal. Infections could creep in, and with no antibiotics, a fever could turn deadly. Yet these women persisted, their resilience a middle finger to the elements. Ironic, right? Colonizers called this primitive, while their own doctors were sawing off limbs with dirty blades. Drop a comment. What's the weirdest traditional remedy you've heard of, and where are you watching from? Now, the Northwest Coast tribes like the Tlingit and Haida brought their own flavor of drama. Childbirth was a village affair, with elaborate regalia, think carved masks and woven cedar capes, worn by attendants to honor the occasion. The mom-to-be was sequestered in a special hut, surrounded by women singing epic tales of creation. Taboos? Don't even glance at a dead fish, or the baby might be born sluggish. No harsh words, or the kid could inherit a sharp tongue. Midwives used hot stones wrapped in moss for counterpressure, and teas from devil's club or nettle to speed things along. The baby arrived, was swaddled in sea otter fur, fancy, right? And the placenta was often tossed into the ocean to ensure the child's connection to water spirits. But the nightmare? Coastal life meant constant threats, storms, rival raids, and later, smallpox from those civilized newcomers. Absurdity check. While Tlingit moms birthed with ancestral songs, European settlers were purging with mercury pills. Who's the savage now? Comment if you'd rather sip nettle tea or risk mercury poisoning. Let me know your time zone too. Here's where the colonial shadow starts creeping in, and it's a gut punch. By the late 1600s, Europeans were nosing around, their journals dripping with both awe and disdain. They marveled at native women's easy births. John Lawson, a Carolina explorer, wrote in 1709 that Indian women delivered without midwives or those torments common to our women. Oh, John, bless your heart. No torments? Tell that to the woman squatting in a snowstorm, praying her baby survives the night. These accounts, often from men barred from the birth scene, missed the raw pain, prolonged labors, breech births, hemorrhages with no modern fixes. Yet native women's recovery speed stunned observers. Why? Because daily life, hauling wood, grinding maize, running from danger, was CrossFit on steroids. Compare that to European women, corseted and fainting, bled by doctors for hysteria. Ironic, isn't it? The savages were out here thriving while colonial medicine was a death trap. What's your take? Would you trade places with a native mom or a corseted colonist? Drop it in the comments and tell me where you're at. Let's zoom to the Iroquois, where childbirth was a masterclass in community. Pregnant women were revered, their dreams interpreted as prophecies. A weird craving? It meant the baby wanted it, so the village scrambled to deliver. Think berries in winter or a specific bird's feather. Labor happened in a longhouse surrounded by female kin, with midwives using slippery elm bark tea to ease contractions. The mom knelt or squatted, gripping a sash tied above. Babies were caught in soft hides, rubbed with bear fat for warmth, and swaddled in cradle boards for mom's mobility. Postpartum? A month of rest in a separate space, but rest meant light tasks while bonding. The placenta, buried to root the child to the earth. Pain was real, obstructed labor could kill, but midwives' herbal knowledge, like blue cohosh, often outshone European leeches. Absurdity? Naming ceremonies tied to stars or animals, with elders predicting the child's path. Survival's bite. Infant mortality was high, especially when European diseases hit. Sarcastic nod. Thanks, smallpox blankets, for civilizing the scene. Comment. Would you dare drink slippery elm tea? Where are you watching, and what's the clock saying? The Algonquian tribes, like the Lenape, leaned hard into nature. Births often happened near rivers, the sound of water a spiritual balm. Pregnant women avoided cold foods like fish, fearing a chilly spirit in the baby. Midwives used warm poultices of sumac leaves and massaged with oils from crushed walnuts. Labor positions? Standing, leaning on a tree, or squatting over a pit lined with hides. The baby dropped, was plunged into cold water for vigor, and wrapped tight. The cord? Kept as a talisman, sometimes sewn into a pouch for luck. But the pain? No sugarcoating, tears, blood, and prayers to the spirits. Yet these women were back to work fast, not out of choice, but necessity. Ironic. Colonial women, with their advanced medicine, often fared worse. By the 1700s, European contact brought new horrors, disease, displacement, and missionaries preaching against pagan rituals. Absurd? Missionaries banned sacred songs but pushed bleeding as a cure. Comment, what's crazier, burying a placenta or bloodletting? Tell me your location and time. Retention teas. Part 3 dives into the colonial wrecking ball. How forced conversions and disease flipped childbirth traditions upside down, with native women still outsmarting the odds. For now, marvel at the resilience. Plains women chanting through blizzards, Pueblo moms and sacred kivas, Northwest singers in regalia. Absurd beliefs? Maybe, but they held communities together. Pain? Unfathomable. Yet they birthed nations. Engaging you. What's the most intense survival story you've heard, ancestral or not? Drop it below with your location. Maybe you're in Tokyo at 2 a.m. or London at tea time. Let's keep this convo alive. The nightmare of history continues, but so does the grit, the wit, and the sheer will to survive. Word count. Hit! Ready for more? Hey guys, welcome back to our unhinged dive into the raw, absurd, and downright heroic world of childbirth in Native American times. If you survived Part 2's whirlwind of Lakota spirit chants, Cheyenne community raves, and colonial explorers scribbling nonsense about easy births, you're in for a treat, or a trauma. Part 3 cranks the dial to 11, zooming into the colonial chaos that slammed into native birthing practices like a runaway horse cart. Picture this. It's the 1700s, and a Cree woman is squatting in a birch bark lodge, midwives chanting, herbs brewing, while some missionary nearby is clutching pearls, muttering about heathen rituals. Oh, the irony. Europeans brought smallpox and leeches, yet called native ways barbaric. We're unpacking the pain, the survival, and the sassy resilience of women who birthed through a cultural apocalypse. Drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from, and what's the wildest clash of old and new you've heard about? Let's keep this saga spicy and dive into the next 2,000 words of historical madness. The scene shifts north to the Cree and Ojibwe, where childbirth was a dance with nature and spirits, but now with a colonial shadow looming. Pregnant Cree women were like spiritual Olympians, navigating a maze of taboos sharper than a porcupine's quills. No eating rabbit might make the baby timid. No staring at a fire too long, or the kid could be born with scorched eyes. And don't even think about stepping over a sleeping dog. Bad luck for the womb. These weren't just quirks. They were survival codes in a world where a single misstep could anger the spirits or weaken the tribe. Women prepared with daily rituals, rubbing their bellies with fish oil for flexibility and sipping teas from willow bark to dull pain. Husbands. They joined in, fasting or praying to the Great Spirit, avoiding tying knots or trapping animals to keep the birth path clear. Labor hit and the woman retreated to a small lodge, often by a river surrounded by female kin and a midwife, called a keeper of life, who wielded herbs like black cohosh and chants like a weapon. Squatting or kneeling, gripping a birch pole, she pushed while songs invoked ancestors. The baby landed on moss or hides, was bathed in cold water to spark that first cry, and wrapped in rabbit fur. The placenta? Buried under a spruce tree to root the child's spirit. Pain? Oh, it was a beast. Hemorrhages, infections, no modern fixes. But these women were tougher than rawhide, often back to gathering berries days later because, life didn't hit pause. Comment if you dare sip willow tea for pain. What's the time where you are? Enter the Europeans, stage left with germs and judgment. By the 1700s, French and English traders were swarming, their journals dripping with smug takes. Jesuit missionary Pierre de Charlevoix wrote in 1721 that native women birthed without pain or inconvenience, as if pushing a human out in a forest was a breezy yoga class. Sure, Pierre, tell that to the Ojibwe mom laboring through a blizzard, praying her baby doesn't freeze before it breathes. These accounts, mostly from men barred from births, missed the grit, prolonged labors, breached nightmares, and the ever-present threat of death. Yet native women's quick recoveries baffled observers. Why? Because hauling water, weaving nets, and dodging wolves kept them fitter than any colonial lady laced into a corset. Ironic, right? Europeans, with their advanced medicine, were slicing veins to cure fevers, while Cree midwives used yarrow and sumac to actually save lives. Absurdity check. Colonial doctors thought bleeding fixed everything, but native herbs often worked better. Drop a comment. What's crazier, herbal brews or bloodletting? Tell me your location and time. Now, let's swing to the southeast, where the Choctaw and Chickasaw turned childbirth into a communal masterpiece, but with colonial storm clouds brewing. A Choctaw woman's pregnancy was a village affair. Elders gifted her with sacred beads, and she avoided taboos like eating turtle meat, lazy baby alert, or sitting under a willow tree, droopy spirit vibes. She walked miles daily to keep her hips loose, whispering stories to her unborn child to instill courage. Labor? She headed to a special hut, surrounded by women singing to the Creator. Midwives used warm compresses of sassafras leaves and teas from red root to speed contractions. Squatting over a pit of soft earth, gripping a rope or a sister's hand, she pushed, the baby landing on deerskin. The cord was cut with a flint knife, tied with sinew, and kept as a talisman. Postpartum, she rested in isolation for a week, sipping broths to regain strength, while the village prepared a naming feast. But survival's bite? Harsh. Infections could kill, and infant mortality was a specter. Enter the colonizers. By the 1730s, trade routes brought smallpox, slashing populations. Missionaries started preaching against pagan rites, pushing European-style births, lying flat, no herbs, no chance. Spoiler, those methods often failed, with colonial women dying at higher rates. Sarcastic nod. Thanks, civilization, for the upgrade. Comment. Would you trust a sassafras compress or a colonial quack? Where are you watching from? The colonial wrecking ball hit hardest in the northeast, where the Wampanoag and Narragansett faced a cultural gut punch. Pregnancy was sacred. Women were seen as life-givers, their dreams oracles. A Wampanoag mom-to-be avoided shellfish, weak baby vibes, and wove mats to visualize an easy birth. Labor happened in a wigwam, with the midwives using quahog shell tools and cranberry leaf tea for pain. Kneeling or squatting, leaning on a frame, she delivered onto cattail mats. The baby was rubbed with bear grease, swaddled in furs, and named after a vision or season. But the 1600s brought English settlers, and with them disease and dogma. Smallpox decimated tribes, and Puritan missionaries banned sacred songs, calling them devilry. By the 1700s, some native women were coerced into colonial-style births, flat on their backs, no community, no herbs. Result? Higher mortality. Ironic, isn't it? The savage ways kept more moms alive than the civilized ones. Absurdity alert. Puritans thought praying alone fixed childbirth woes, while Wampanoag midwives used practical herbs like partridge berry. Drop a comment. What's more absurd, banning chants or trusting prayers over medicine? Include your time zone. Out west, the Shoshone kept it rugged but reverent. Pregnant women avoided jackrabbit meat, scaredy cat baby, and walked desert trails to stay strong. They offered sagebrush to the spirits, believing it eased the baby's path. Labor? A small lodge, midwives with juniper tea, and a mom squatting over a hide-lined pit. The baby was bathed in warm spring water, rubbed with red ochre for protection, and strapped to a cradleboard so mom could keep moving. The placenta, buried in a sacred spot to tie the child to the land. Pain was no joke. Long labors could exhaust, and without modern tech, complications were a gamble. But colonial contact by the 1800s brought new horrors. Forced displacement, like the Trail of Tears for some tribes, disrupted birthing traditions. Traders introduced alcohol, which some used to dull pain, often with dire results. Sarcasm check. Thanks, colonizers, for swapping sage tea for whiskey. Comment. Would you brave a Shoshone desert birth or stick to a hospital? Where are you, and what's the clock saying? The Apache, meanwhile, turned childbirth into a spiritual showdown. Pregnancy meant rituals galore. No looking at snakes, evil vibes. No eating spicy foods, hot-tempered baby. Women drank mezcal root tea and walked under starry skies to align with cosmic forces. Labor happened in a wickiup, with midwives, called Mothers of the Cord, using ropes for support and chants to summon strength. Babies landed on soft hides, were cleansed with yucca suds and swaddled tight. The cord? Dried and kept in a pouch for luck. But the pain? Brutal. Apache women endured without modern meds, relying on herbs like black haw. Colonial impact. By the 1800s, Spanish missions forced some into Catholic-style births, banning traditional midwives. Result? More deaths, less community. Ironic. Apache ways, with their herbal smarts, often outdid Spanish medicine. Comment. What's wilder, cord pouches or mission bands? Tell me your location and time. Retention tease 2. Part 4 dives into the modern echoes, how native midwives fought back, blending old wisdom with new tech in the ongoing battle against healthcare disparities. For now, marvel at the Cree's river births, Choctaws' communal huts, Wampanoag's dream-guided pregnancies, all under colonial siege. Absurd beliefs? Maybe, but they wove tribes together. Pain? Crushing, yet these women birthed through it, defying odds. Engaging you. What's the toughest survival tale in your family lore? Drop it below with your location. Maybe you're in Brazil at midnight or Canada at dawn. Let's keep this convo roaring. The nightmare of history deepens. Colonizers tried to erase these ways, but native resilience laughed in their faces. Word count hit. Ready for the finale? Hey guys, welcome to the grand finale of our wild, sarcastic, and gut-wrenching journey through childbirth in Native American times. If you've stuck with us through solitary forest births, placenta burials, and colonial quacks peddling leeches while calling native rituals savage, you're a trooper. Part 4 cranks the absurdity to max, diving into how native women kept birthing nations despite the colonial wrecking ball, and how their legacy fights on today with a smirk and a side of modern grit. Picture this. It's the 1800s, and a Comanche woman is squatting in a teepee, midwives chanting, herbs burning, while settlers nearby push civilized births that'd make you beg for a time machine back to the old ways. We're unpacking the pain, the defiance, and the ironic triumph of traditions that outsmarted history's chaos. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what's the craziest survival story in your family's past? Let's wrap this saga with 2,000 words of historical madness and modern fire. We start on the Great Plains with the Comanche, the ultimate nomads, where childbirth was less a medical event and more a high-stakes spiritual rodeo. Pregnant women were like warriors prepping for battle, dodging taboos sharper than a cactus spine. No eating owl meat might make the baby nocturnal or, worse, creepy. No sitting cross-legged, could knot up the womb. And don't even glance at a dead horse, lest the kid inherit a limp spirit. These rules weren't just quirky, they were survival blueprints in a world where one wrong move could tank the tribe. Moms-to-be walked miles to keep strong, sipped teas from prickly pear to ease labor, and offered sage to the spirits for a smooth delivery. Husbands? They prayed, avoided tying ropes, and steered clear of hunting certain game to keep the cosmic vibes clear. Labor hit, and the woman retreated to a teepee, surrounded by midwives called life weavers, who burned cedar for cleansing and chanted to the Creator. Squatting or kneeling, gripping a buffalo hide strap, she pushed, the baby landing on soft pelts. The first cry? Sparked by a dip in cold water or a gentle earth thud. The placenta? Buried under a rock to anchor the child's soul. Pain? A monster. Hemorrhages, infections, no epidurals. But Comanche women were back on horseback days later, because pausing meant vulnerability in a world of raids and hunger. Comment if you dare birth in a teepee. What's the time where you are? Now, the colonial storm hits full force. By the 1800s, settlers, missionaries, and soldiers were everywhere, dragging disease and dogma. Smallpox, measles, and cholera slashed native populations, making every birth a high-stakes gamble. European observers, like George Catlin in the 1830s, gushed about native women's effortless deliveries, as if squatting through a 12-hour labor in a dust storm was a picnic. Oh, George, stick to painting. These accounts missed the raw terror, breech births, prolonged labors, and no modern tech to save the day. Yet native women's resilience stunned. Why? Their lives, tracking game, tanning hides, dodging danger, were a daily Ironman. Compare that to settler women, fainting in tight corsets bled by doctors for female weakness. Ironic, right? Comanche midwives used herbs like blue cohosh to speed labor, while colonial docs pushed mercury pills that killed more than they cured. Absurdity check. Settlers called native ways primitive, yet their own infant mortality rates were abysmal. Drop a comment. What's wilder, herbal teas or mercury poisoning? Tell me your location and time. Swing to the Pacific Northwest, where the Salish and Chinook wove childbirth into a tapestry of ritual and survival. Pregnant Salish women avoided salmon during spawning season, might make the baby restless. They walked coastal trails, offered shells to the sea spirits, and sipped nettle tea for strength. Labor happened in a cedar plank longhouse with midwives, called wave mothers, using warm seaweed poultices and songs to call ancestors. The mom knelt or squatted, gripping a carved pole, the baby landing on moss or hides. Post-birth, the newborn was rubbed with fish oil for warmth, swaddled in cedar bark, and named after a tide or star. The placenta? Tossed into the ocean to tie the child to water spirits. But the pain? Brutal, long labors, no antibiotics, and the ever-present threat of infection. Colonial impact? By the 1800s, fur traders and missionaries brought smallpox and banned sacred songs, calling them witchcraft. Result? Disrupted traditions and higher deaths. Sarcastic nod. Thanks, progress, for replacing wave mothers with prayers and puss. Comment. Would you trust seaweed poultices or colonial cures? Where are you tuning in from? Down in the southeast, the Seminole kept it fierce despite colonial pressure. Pregnant women dodged alligator meat, aggressive baby vibes, and wove palmetto fronds to visualize an easy birth. They drank sassafras tea and walked swamps to stay limber. Labor? A chicky hut, open to the breeze, with midwives using kunti root tea to ease contractions. Squatting over a pit of soft earth, gripping a vine, the mom delivered, the baby caught in palmetto leaves. The cord was cut with a shark-tooth blade, kept as a talisman. Postpartum, moms rested in a hammock, sipping herbal broths, while the village prepped a naming dance. But survival's bite? Harsh. Malaria from swamps, no modern meds. By the 1830s, forced removals like the Trail of Tears ripped Seminole families apart, scattering birthing knowledge. Missionaries pushed European-style births, flat on the back, no herbs, often with deadly results. Ironic, Seminole midwives with their root teas outdid colonial medicine that relied on bleeding. Absurdity alert. Missionaries banned dances but swore by leeches. Drop a comment. What's crazier, palmetto births or bloodletting? Include your time zone. Now, let's talk modern echoes where the story gets both inspiring and infuriating. By the late 1800s, boarding schools and forced assimilations tried to erase native birthing traditions. Kids were torn from families, taught to scorn their pagan roots. Yet some knowledge survived, whispered by grandmas, hidden in ceremonies. Fast forward to today. Indigenous midwives like Nicole Gonzalez, a Navajo Chicana, are reviving old ways, blending them with modern tech. They use black cohosh alongside ultrasounds, sacred songs with sterile tools. But the pain persists. Native American women face triple the maternal mortality rates of white women, thanks to underfunded clinics and systemic bias. Ironic, isn't it? The descendants of women who birthed through blizzards now fight for basic health care. Sarcasm. Check. Thanks, modern world, for improving access. Yet, groups like the Changing Woman Initiative are pushing back, training midwives, reclaiming rituals. Comment. What's more inspiring, this revival or the old school grit? Tell me where you're at and what time it is. Back to the past, the Great Basin's Paiute kept childbirth raw and reverent. Pregnant women avoided pinyon nuts, fussy baby risk, and walked desert paths to stay strong. They burned sage for cleansing, sipped yucca tea for labor prep. Birth happened in a willow-framed hut, with midwives using rabbit brush poultices and chants to earth spirits. Squatting or kneeling, gripping a rope, the mom delivered onto hides. The baby was rubbed with red clay, swaddled in rabbit fur, and strapped to a cradle board. The placenta, buried in a sacred spot to tie the child to the land. Pain? No joke. Obstructed labors could kill, no C-sections in sight. Colonial impact? By the 1870s, settlers brought disease and forced relocations, disrupting traditions. Absurd. Paiute midwives used herbs like desert parsley, while settlers pushed laudanum, an opium-laced disaster. Comment. Would you sip yucca tea or risk opium? Where are you watching from? The final twist. Native birthing wasn't just about survival, it was defiance. Every baby born was a middle finger to colonial erasure. Tribes like the Crow held naming ceremonies under starlight, tying kids to ancestors despite missionary bans. The Blackfeet buried placentas under sacred stones even as settlers stole their lands. Pain was universal. Long labors, no painkillers, but so was resilience. Modern native midwives carry this torch, fighting disparities with sage and science. Absurdity? Colonizers called native ways backward, yet their own cures were death sentences. Engaging you. What's the toughest tradition you'd revive from your culture? Drop it below with your location. Maybe you're in Mexico at midnight or Ireland at dawn. Retention rap. This saga's done, but the story lives. Native women birthed through chaos, and their legacy endures. Word count hit. Let's end with a smirk at history's absurdity and awe at its heroes. Comment, subscribe, and tell me, what's your takeaway from this epic? Imagine this. You're a prehistoric woman, deep in the Stone Age, belly swollen like a overripe berry, waddling through a world where saber-toothed tigers lurk behind every bush, and your healthcare plan is basically hoping a cave bear doesn't crash. Your labor party. No epidurals, no sterile hospitals, just you, some grunting companions, and the raw, absurd brutality of nature deciding if you and your mini-human make it out alive. Welcome to the nightmare of prehistoric childbirth, where survival wasn't a guarantee, it was a cruel joke played by evolution. Stick around, because this tale of agony, irony, and ancient absurdity will make you hug your modern OBGYN. And hey, if you've ever wondered how humanity clawed its way through this mess, drop a comment below. What's the wildest survival story you've heard? Let's chat about our ancestors' epic fails. The Paleolithic era. Let's call it the good old days. If by good you mean dodging mammoths while pregnant, and old if you mean old school suffering that makes modern root canals look like spa days. Picture the scene. It's around 200,000 years ago. Homo sapiens are just getting their act together in Africa. Brains ballooning bigger than their pelvises can handle, thanks to evolution's hilarious prank. Bigger heads for smarter thoughts? Sure, but try pushing that melon through a birth canal designed for something more monkey-sized. Nature's idea of progress. Make babies smarter, but make birthing them a life or death gamble. Irony level? Expert. Our heroine. Let's name her Zara, because why not give these forgotten badasses names? Is 9 months in, her body a walking testament to the absurdity of human design. Back then, women didn't have due dates circled on calendars. They had instincts screaming, find a spot, any spot, before this thing decides to evict itself. No ultrasounds to check if it's breech. No apps tracking contractions. Just the primal urge and a tribe that's half helpful, half hoping you don't attract predators with your screams. Zara's tribe is nomadic, chasing herds across savannas that stretch like endless bad decisions. Pregnancy? It's not a pampered phase with prenatal yoga and cravings for ice cream. Oh no, Zara's been foraging berries that might be poisonous, hauling water from rivers teeming with crocs, and sleeping on dirt floors that double as bug buffets. Nutrition? A mix of roots, nuts, and whatever meat the men drag back, if they drag back anything. Malnutrition was the norm, turning pregnancies into high-stakes lotteries where anemia and weak bones upped the ante on disaster. But here's the kicker. Despite the horror show, these women were tough as flint. Archaeology whispers, clues, pelvic bones scarred from multiple births, like badges of barely survived battles. One study from ancient skeletons shows birth scars on the pubis, grooves etched by ligaments tearing during labor. Imagine that. Your body literally carving memories of pain into your bones. Sarcasm alert. Thanks, evolution, for the permanent souvenirs. As labor hits, Zara feels the first pangs, waves of cramps that build like a storm no shaman can charm away. No clocks, time is measured in sunsets and sweat. She squats, because lying down, that's a modern luxury invented by clueless medieval docs. Gravity was the original midwife, pulling the baby earthward while Zara grips a tree branch or a fellow woman's hand. Upright positions, squatting, kneeling, were the go-to, as carvings from later times hint, but in prehistory, pure instinct, baby. Her birthing team, other women from the tribe, the elders who've been through this circus before. They gather around, chanting or grunting encouragement, maybe rubbing her back with animal fat or herbs that smell like desperation. Willow bark for pain? Sure, if they knew about it, early aspirin, chewed raw, tasting like regret. But mostly it's raw endurance. No sterile gloves, hands caked in dirt, risking infections that could turn triumph into tragedy overnight. The absurdity peaks during delivery. The baby's head, oversized for that narrow pelvis, thanks again big brain evolution, gets stuck, a condition called cephalopelvic disproportion. In modern times, C-section saves the day. Back then, push harder, pray louder, or die trying. Mortality rates? Brutal. Estimates peg natural maternal death at 1,500 per 100,000 births. Compare that to today's global average of 211. For every 1,000 births, 15 moms didn't make it. And infants? Up to 40% mortality in some eras, from breech positions to umbilical cords wrapping like nooses. Zara pushes, sweat mixing with blood on the ground, the tribe circling like a prehistoric pep rally. If things go south, hemorrhage, infection, eclampsia, that's seizures from high blood pressure, folks. There's no ER, just nature's cold shoulder. One ironic twist, in colder climates like Ice Age Europe, birthing in caves meant huddling for warmth, but smoke from fires could choke you, and predators sniffed out vulnerability. Cozy, right? Success. The baby emerges, slimy and squalling, a tiny survivor in a world of giants. Zara cuts the cord with a sharpened stone, flint knife, baby scissors of the Stone Age, and the placenta follows, maybe buried as a ritual or eaten for nutrients, though evidence is sketchy. The newborn? Wrapped in animal hides, nursed immediately if mom's alive. Breastfeeding was the only game in town, lasting years, acting as natural birth control via lactational amenorrhea. Smart hack by biology, spacing kids so tribes didn't overrun resources. But oh, the pain of survival. Zara's body wrecked, torn tissues, exhaustion that lasts weeks. Recovery, forage lightly, hope no infection set in. Puerperal fever, that post-birth killer, lurked without antibiotics. And if the baby dies, heartbreak and silence, buried quick to avoid attracting beasts. Archaeology finds infant skeletons aplenty in settlements, silent testaments to loss. Fast forward a bit, still Paleolithic, but tribes settling semi-permanently. Huts from mammoth bones, fires crackling, birthing gets a tad fancier. Maybe a designated spot warmed by flames, shielded from wind. Women share stories around the hearth. Remember when Grook's wife pushed for 3 sons? Baby came out feet first. Miracle. Laughter masks the terror. Bonding over shared absurdity. Evidence from sites like Dolny Vistanec in Czech Republic. 25,000 years ago, clay figurines of pregnant women, exaggerated bellies and breasts. Fertility idols? Or birthing talismans clutched during labor for luck. Imagine Zara holding one, whispering please to whatever spirits ruled the wild. Absurd? Totally. Effective. Placebo power, perhaps. Mortality haunts every tale. One model from ancient bones estimates 1 to 2% of women died per birth, compounding over multiple pregnancies. Average kids? 5 to 7, starting at 15 to 20 years old. Do the math. A woman's life, a gauntlet of risks. Yet humanity persisted because survivors like Zara raised the next generation amid woolly rhinos and endless winters. Engage with me here. What if you were Zara? Would you squat by a fire or risk a cave? Comment your prehistoric survival tips below. Let's build a tribe in the comments. As we delve deeper, the absurdity amps up. Enter the Mesolithic post-Ice Age thaw around 10,000 BCE. Forests bloom but birthing, still a savage lottery. Tribes semi-settled near rivers, fishing and gathering. Zara's descendants, call her Lena, face new twists. Denser groups mean more help but also more germs. Communal living? Great for sharing tools, bad for spreading infections. Lena's pregnant again, 3rd time, because spacing via breastfeeding only works so well. Labor strikes during a hunt gone long. Men are out, women rally. They dig a shallow pit for her to squat over, catching blood in afterbirth, practical if gross. Herbs evolve. Maybe raspberry leaves for toning uterus, fennel for pain. Knowledge passed orally, trial and error wisdom. Wrong herb, poisonous surprise, breech birth, disaster. No turning techniques documented, but instinct might guide hands to maneuver. Success rate? Flip a stone. Heads you live, tails. Welcome. Infant skulls from sites show deformities from obstructed labors, crushed in the canal. Painful irony. Evolution gave us tools to think our way out, but not hips wide enough. Social side, birth is ritual. Some tribes paint bodies with ochre, symbolizing blood and life. Chants invoke animal spirits, bear for strength, deer for speed. Absurd? Sure, but it beats screaming alone. And if mom dies, tribe adopts the orphan or it perishes. Harsh Darwinism. Archaeology gives us rarities. The woman of Barham from Sweden, Mesolithic skeleton with birth indicators, widened pelvis, scars. She survived multiple deliveries, a queen of endurance, but many didn't. Peak female deaths, 20 to 30 years old, prime birthing age. Coincidence? Nope. Lena delivers a girl, names her after stars or something poetic. Nursing begins, weaning delayed to 3 to 4 years with mashed roots. Bone spoons from Neolithic hint at early weaning aids, but here, fingers and hope. The nightmare deepens in colder zones. Ice age birthing, hypothermia kills newborns fast. Solutions? Skin to skin in fur bundles, fires banked high. But smoke inhalation? Another killer. Absurd balance, warmth versus asphyxiation. Comment challenge. If you could time travel with one modern item to a prehistoric birth, what? Antibiotics? Forceps? Share below. Your ideas might spark a debate. Transitioning to Neolithic revolution around 8000 BCE. Farming flips the script, but birthing, amplified chaos. Settled villages mean more food, more babies, more deaths. Carbs fatten fetuses, narrow pelvises from shorter statures. Thanks, agriculture. Mortality spikes, graves fill with young women and infants. Our next mom, Kira, farms barley, herds goats. Pregnancy amid toil. Plowing fields at 8 months, normal. Labor in a mud hut, midwives, elder women assisting. Positions evolve, still squatting, but with birthing stools. Early prototypes from wood. Herbs advance, poppy for pain, opium precursor. Ergot for contractions, risky as hell. Knowledge grows, but trial error claims lives. Twins? Rare, deadly, double the obstruction risk. Social absurdity, birth as community event. Villagers gather, drumming to drown screams, offering amulets. Success, feast, failure, mourning rituals, bodies buried under floors for protection. Evidence, Çatalhöyük in Turkey, 9,000 years old. Wall paintings possibly depicting births, women in labor poses. Pelvic analyses show multiple parodies, scars galore. Mortality math. Models estimate 2 to 3% per birth in farming societies. With 6 to 10 kids, cumulative risk 12 to 30%. Women died young, men outlived. Irony, farming civilized us but killed moms faster. Kira pushes through, baby boy emerges. Aftercare, herbal poultices for tears. Rest? Ha, back to field soon. Infections rage without hygiene. Engage. Ever thought farming made life easier? Comment how this changes your view. Let's unpack the Neolithic nightmare. Deeper into Neolithic, weaning innovations, bone spoons for gruel, milk and cereals, from 7,500 years ago. Babies supplemented earlier, moms pregnant sooner. Population boom, but at what cost? More births, more deaths. Cold climates persist in Europe, birthing in longhouses heated by hearths, but drafts kill. Solutions, animal skins partitioning birthing rooms. Absurd ingenuity. One case, Vietnam skeleton, 4,000 years old. Woman died in breech labor, fetus stuck. Frozen in agony, a snapshot of horror. Kira's life. Multiple births scar her, but she teaches daughters the ropes. Cycle of pain, passed down. As part 1 wraps, we're just scratching the flint. Remember, prehistoric birth was evolution's cruel comedy. Big brains, tiny hips, zero mercy. Yet here we are, descendants of survivors. Part 2 dives into Bronze Age twists, metals, but same mortal mess. Word count check, craving more absurdity. Comment, bring on Part 2 and your wildest prehistoric birth theory. Stay tuned, survivors. History's nightmare continues. Welcome back to the Prehistoric Delivery Room, where the vibe is less bundle of joy and more bundle of please don't die. The Bronze Age has kicked in. Think 3000 BCE, Mesopotamia's scribbling cuneiform, Egypt's stacking pyramids, and Europe's Shu, building stone circles that scream, we're fancy now. But fancy doesn't mean safe. Childbirth? Still a high-stakes gamble where the house always wins. Our gal Mara is pregnant in a muddy village by the Danube, surrounded by bronze axes and the stench of survival. She's about to learn that new tools don't fix old biology, and evolution's still laughing at her pelvis. Mara's world is louder than Zara's savannah. Villages are bigger, huts sturdier. Think wattle and daub, not caves. Farming's in full swing, so there's more grain, more goats, more mouths to feed. Population's booming, which means more babies, more births, more chances to roll the dice with death. Women are popping out kids like it's their job, because it kind of is. Bigger tribes need more hands for fields, and society's starting to whisper, hey lady, your value's tied to how many warriors or farmers you produce. No pressure, right? Mara's diet is slightly better than her ancestors. Barley porridge, lentils, the occasional sheep shank. But better is relative. Scurvy's still a guest star, and calcium deficiency makes her bones brittle. Bigger babies, thanks to carbs, are squeezing through pelvises that haven't caught up. Cephalopelvic disproportion, fancy term for head too big, hips too small, is still the Grim Reaper's favorite party trick. Studies of Bronze Age skeletons show pelvic scarring worse than earlier eras, proof of more births, more trauma. One analysis from a Hungarian site: women's pelvises bore deep grooves, like battle scars from a war with their own bodies. Irony alert, civilization's progress made childbirth deadlier. Labor hits Mara like a chariot wheel to the gut. No cozy birthing suites here. She's squatting in a hut, straw on the floor soaking up the mess. The community's involved now. Childbirth's a spectacle. Midwives, older women, survivors of this madness, circle her, muttering prayers to fertility goddesses like Inanna or some local deity with a name like she who doesn't care if you bleed out. They've got tricks, boiled herbs like pennyroyal for pain, maybe opium poppy if they're near trade routes. But these are guesses. Herbs are trial and error means convulsions or worse. No FDA in 3000 BCE, folks. Positions haven't changed much. Squatting's still queen. Gravity's the only reliable tech, though some cultures might have rigged crude birthing stools, wooden frames to support the hips. Evidence? Shaky, but later Egyptian reliefs show similar setups, so maybe Mara's leaning on something. Her midwives knead her belly, maybe too hard, risking uterine rupture. No one's writing medical manuals. Knowledge is oral, patchy, and often wrong. One wrong move, say, pushing too early, and the baby's stuck, cord wrapped, or worse, breech. Breech births? A 50-50 shot at disaster. No forceps, no C-sections, just desperate hands and hope. The social absurdity ramps up. Birth's a village event now. Neighbors peek in, kids gawk. Men linger outside, sharpening spears and pretending they're not nervous. If Mara's lucky, a shaman burns herbs, waving smoke to chase evil spirits. Superstitious? Sure, but when your mortality rate's 2 to 3% per birth, you'll try anything. Some tribes smear ochre on her belly, red for blood, life, or just we're out of ideas. Artifacts from Crete show figurines of women in labor poses, arms raised, prayer or pain, probably both. Let's talk numbers, because they're grim. Estimates from Bronze Age burials. Maternal mortality around 1,800 per 100,000 births, up from Paleolithic's 1,500. Why? Denser populations, worse sanitation. Infections like puerperal fever thrive in villages where waste piles up. Infant mortality? Still 30 to 40%, with causes like hypoxia, baby can't breathe, infections, or plain bad luck. One grave from Bahrain, 2500 BCE. A woman buried with a fetus, likely stillborn, pelvis locked in labor's grip. The ultimate bad day. Mara pushes, screams echoing off mud walls. Her midwives chant, maybe slip her a brew of ergot, a fungus that speeds contractions but can kill if overdosed. Fun fact, ergot's the ancestor of modern oxytocin, but back then it was like playing roulette with mushrooms. Success. The baby, a girl, slips out, umbilical cord cut with a bronze blade, sharper than flint but still a germ magnet. The placenta's buried outside, a ritual to appease gods or just keep hyenas away. Mara's alive, for now, but the after-party's no picnic. Postpartum's a minefield. No sterile bandages, maybe linen strips if she's near a trade hub like Sumer. Tears from delivery fester, infections creep in. Mara's breastfeeding, but malnutrition makes milk scarce. If the baby doesn't latch, it's game over. Wet nurses? Rare, unless the tribe's tight-knit. Weaning's years off, but Mara's already dodging mastitis, breast infections that turn nursing into torture. No antibiotics, just poultices of questionable herbs. The irony thickens. Bronze Age tech, sickles, plows, boost food, but not health. Women bear more kids, starting younger, around 14 to 16. Average lifespan, mid-30s if lucky. Multiple births, 6, 8, 10, grind Mara down. Each one's a roll of the dice, and the odds aren't kind. A study of Minoan Crete skeletons. Women's bones show stress fractures, pelvic damage, signs of exhaustion by 25. Men, often outliving them, remarrying, while women paid the ultimate price for population growth. But let's zoom out for some cultural spice. In Mesopotamia, births tied to mythology. Goddesses like Ninhursag shape clay babies in myths, but real women like Mara get no divine assist. Temples offer fertility charms, amulets of lapis lazuli, but they're more bling than medicine. In Europe, megalithic tombs hint at ancestor worship. Maybe Mara's praying to her mom, who didn't make it through her last birth. Absurd? Totally. Comforting? Maybe. Complications get nastier. Eclampsia, seizures from high blood pressure, strikes without warning. No magnesium sulfate. Mara's shaking, midwives panicking, game over. Hemorrhage. They might pack the birth canal with moss or cloth, but blood loss kills fast. One archaeological gem, a Sicilian site, 2800 BCE with a woman's skeleton, pelvis widened, signs of catastrophic bleeding. Her story's silent but screams across millennia. The community's role grows. If Mara survives, she's a hero. Village feasts celebrate new life. If she doesn't, the baby's passed to another woman or buried with her. Graves from this era often pair mothers and infants, a grim duo. Social status shifts. High-ranking women, like priestesses, might get better care, cleaner huts, more food. But biology doesn't care about status. Even queens bled out. Let's pivot to tech. Bronze tools sound cool, but they're not saving moms. Forceps? Not invented yet. Surgery? Closest thing is trepanation, drilling skulls for headaches, not exactly OBGYN material. Midwives rely on hands, herbs, and guts. Some cultures, like early Indus Valley, hint at basic hygiene. Boiled water maybe, but it's spotty. Germ theory's 5,000 years away, so infections rule. Mara's daughter grows, learning the birthing ropes from aunts, because Mara's odds of surviving another round are slim. Knowledge transfers oral, stories of what worked, what killed. One wrong tale, like this root stops bleeding when it's toxic, wipes out trust. Yet some tricks stick. Massage for labor progression, squatting for leverage. Midwives are the unsung MVPs, piecing together wisdom amid chaos. Cold climates add flavor to the nightmare. In Northern Europe, long houses shield from snow, but dampness breeds bacteria. Mara's cousin in Scandinavia labors by a smoky hearth. Warmth a lifesaver, smoke a lung killer. Babies are swaddled in furs, but hypothermia is a stealth assassin. Irony, the same fire keeping you alive might choke your newborn. Archaeology drops clues. A Bulgarian site, 3000 BCE, shows a woman's skeleton with pelvic trauma, likely a botched birth. Nearby, infant bones too small to survive. These aren't just bones, they're stories of grit and loss. Mara's fighting that legacy, every push a defiance of stats. Here we are, folks, in the Iron Age, around 1200 BCE. when humanity's swinging iron swords, forging empires, and still losing spectacularly at the childbirth game. Picture Tana, our badass mom-to-be, waddling through a hill fort in what's now Britain, her belly rounder than the wheels on some fancy new chariot. The world's got more tech, iron plows, better kilns, but childbirth? It's like evolution sent an intern to design the human pelvis and forgot to check their work. Tana is about to face the same brutal odds as her ancestors, but now, with a side of tribal politics and a village full of nosy neighbors betting on her survival. Spoiler: the house always wins, and the house is nature's cruel sense of humor. Tana's life is a step up from Mara's muddy Bronze Age hut. Her village is a fortified sprawl, wooden palisades, thatched roofs, the stench of livestock and ambition. Iron's the hot new thing, making tools sharper and wars bloodier, but it's not exactly revolutionizing obstetrics. Tana's diet is steadier: wheat, barley, pork from pigs that root too close to the latrine pit. Nutrition's improved, but not enough to dodge rickets or anemia, which make her bones ache and her energy tank. Bigger babies, thanks to surplus grain, are still trying to squeeze through pelvises built for smaller primates. Iron Age skeletons tell the tale. Pelvic scars are deeper, wider, etched from multiple births. One study from a Celtic site shows women's pubis bones practically screaming, "We've been through hell." Evolution's irony? Smarter babies, deadlier deliveries. Labor slams Tana like a warhammer. No cozy birthing centers here. She's in a smoky longhouse, squatting on a straw mat that's seen better days. The community's all up in her business now. Childbirth's a public sport. Midwives, grizzled survivors with hands like leather, circle her, chanting to goddesses like Epona or some local spirit who's probably too busy to care. They've got herbs. Oh boy, do they have herbs. Mugwort to speed contractions, yarrow for bleeding, maybe a sketchy brew of mandrake that's as likely to knock you out as kill you. Knowledge is still oral, passed down like a game of telephone where the stakes are life and death. One wrong plant and Tana's a goner. Squatting's still the go-to position. Gravity's the only doctor who shows up on time. Some cultures, like those in the Near East, might have used birthing stools by now, carved from wood or even stone, with a hole for the baby to drop through. Evidence? A Hittite relief from 1300 BCE shows a woman on a stool, midwives below like they're catching a fastball. Tana's probably got a crude version, or she's gripping a rope slung over a beam, pulling like her life depends on it, because it does. Her midwives massage her belly, maybe too aggressively, risking tears or worse. No one's got a manual, it's all gut instinct and stories from Aunt Gilda who survived her last 3 births. Barely. The social circus is peak absurdity. The whole village is invested, elders praying, kids sneaking peeks, men outside boasting about their own battles while Tana fights the real one. Rituals are thicker now. Amulets of iron or amber dangle around her neck, supposed to ward off evil spirits. Spoiler: they don't ward off infections. Some tribes smear her with red ochre or animal blood, symbolizing life or just making a mess. A Latin culture, fined from France, 1000 BCE, shows a clay figure, pregnant, arms outstretched, prayer for survival, or just Tana's vibe, screaming into the void. The numbers are a gut punch. Maternal mortality's hovering at 1,600 to 2,000 per 100,000 births, slightly better than Bronze Age, but still a nightmare. Why? Sanitation's a joke. Villages are crowded, waste festers, and germs throw a party. Infant mortality stuck at 30 to 35%, with culprits like cord strangulation, prematurity, or plain bad luck. A grave from Iron Age Denmark. A woman mid-20s buried with a newborn, pelvis locked in labor's grip. They didn't make it. Archaeology's cruel gift, silent stories of loss. Tana pushes, sweat and blood soaking the straw. Complications loom like vultures. Breech birth? Midwives might try turning the baby externally, but it's a coin toss, success or disaster. Hemorrhage? They pack the birth canal with linen or moss, hoping it holds. Eclampsia? No one knows what it is. Seizures hit and Tana's gone before the shaman finishes his chant. Iron tools could theoretically help, sharper blades for cord cutting, but they're still germ magnets. One wrong slice and sepsis crashes the party. Success. Tana's baby, a boy, slides out, squalling like he's already mad at the world. The cord's cut with an iron knife, a step up from flint but still no match for bacteria. The placenta's buried outside, maybe under the house for luck, or burned to keep spirits happy. Tana's alive, but the postpartum gauntlet's just beginning. No sterile pads, maybe linen rags, but they're washed in a stream full of who knows what. Infections like puerperal fever are silent killers, turning victory into tragedy in days. Breastfeeding's the only option, but if milk's low, the baby's at risk. Wet nurses? Only if the tribe's got spares, and even then, it's a status thing. The irony's thick as bog mud. Iron Age tech, swords, plows, wheels, makes life flashier, but childbirth's still a prehistoric death trap. Women like Tana start birthing younger, around 14, pumping out 7 to 10 kids to fuel growing tribes. Each birth's a gamble, and the odds stack up. A study of Hallstatt culture graves, women's skeletons 20 to 30, show pelvic trauma, stress fractures, signs of exhaustion. Men, often hitting 40, remarrying, while women paid the price for population booms. Civilization's price tag, written in maternal blood. Culturally, it's a mixed bag. In the Near East, Babylonian texts mention birth rituals, incantations to Ishtar, clay tablets listing herbs, but they're still guessing. In Europe, Celtic tribes weave myths around birth. Think Brigid, goddess of fertility, who's no help when your uterus is rupturing. Amulets and charms are everywhere, from carved bones to iron rings. Absurd? Sure, but when your odds are 1 in 50 of dying per birth, you'll clutch anything. One find from Germany, a woman's grave with a tiny iron pendant shaped like a womb. Hope in metal form. Complications get uglier. Obstructed labor, baby stuck, pelvis too small, kills fast. Midwives might try desperate measures like breaking the baby's skull to save the mom. Grim? You bet. Evidence? Rare, but later Greek texts hint at it. Hemorrhage remains a top killer. No blood transfusions, just prayers and panic. One skeleton from an Italian site, 800 BCE, a woman, pelvis fractured mid-birth, baby half-delivered, frozen in failure. The community's role is double-edged. If Tana survives, she's a rock star. Feasts, songs, maybe a new status as that mom who didn't die. If she doesn't, the baby's adopted or buried with her. Graves from this era often pair moms and infants, a heartbreaking trend. High-status women, chieftains' wives, priestesses might get cleaner huts, better food, but biology's no respecter of rank. Everyone's equal in the birth canal. Iron Age tech teases progress but delivers little. Iron knives are sharper, sure, but still carry germs. Early surgical attempts, mostly trepanation for head injuries, not childbirth. Midwives rely on experience, not textbooks. Some tricks work. Yarrow stops bleeding, squatting leverages gravity, but others, like toxic herb doses, backfire. Knowledge is power, but it's scattered, oral, and often wrong. Tana is teaching her daughters already. Birthing lore, herb mixes, how to grit your teeth through the pain. The cycle continues, each generation dodging the same bullets. Cold climates add extra misery. In Scandinavia, labor in a longhouse means warmth, but also smoke inhalation. Babies swaddled in furs face hypothermia if the fire dies. Irony, the tech keeping you alive might kill your kid. Archaeology paints a stark picture. A Polish site, 1000 BCE, yields a woman's skeleton, pelvis widened, scars from multiple births. Nearby, infant bones too fragile to last. Tana is fighting that fate, every push a rebellion against stats. Here we are, folks, in the classical age, 500 BCE to 300 CE, where Greeks are waxing poetic about the cosmos, Romans are plumbing their way to glory, and childbirth is still the ultimate middle finger from biology. Meet Livia, our pregnant heroine, waddling through a dusty agora in a Greco-Roman town, her belly bigger than a philosopher's ego. The world's buzzing with new ideas, geometry, democracy, aqueducts, but when it comes to pushing out a baby, it's the same old horror show, just with better architecture. Livia's about to learn that scrolls and scalpels don't outsmart evolution's cruel prank. Big-brained babies, tiny pelvises, and a mortality rate that laughs at your toga. Buckle up for the final chapter of our prehistoric birthing nightmare, where the absurdity hits peak civilization. Livia's living the high life in a stone house with a tiled roof, maybe even a mosaic floor if her husband's a big shot. Compared to Tana's Iron Age mud hut, it's posh, but don't get too comfy. Sanitation's better, Romans love their baths, but open sewers in crowded cities mean germs are having a field day. Livia's diet is a step up: bread, olives, fish, maybe some wine if she's fancy. But malnutrition's still a guest star, with rickets and anemia making her bones brittle and her energy non-existent. Bigger babies, thanks to surplus wheat, are still trying to ram through pelvises designed for smaller primates. Skeletal evidence from Pompeii shows women's pelvises scarred like war zones, grooves from multiple births screaming, "This was not fun." Evolution's irony. The smarter we get, the deadlier delivery becomes. Labor hits Livia like a chariot crash. No hospitals, she's in her home, or maybe a midwife's back room, lying on a straw-stuffed mat that smells like last week's sacrifices. The Greeks and Romans are starting to write stuff down, so we've got actual texts now, like Hippocrates' rants about the womb wandering, spoiler, it doesn't, or Serenus gynecology, which sounds legit but is half guesswork. Livia's midwives, trained women, maybe even professionals in cities, are her lifeline. They've got tricks: olive oil to lubricate, herbs like fennel for pain, or rue to speed contractions, which might also poison you. Fun times. Knowledge is growing, but it's still a patchwork of brilliance and baloney. Squatting's still the MVP position, gravity's the only tech that doesn't fail. But now, birthing chairs are a thing, especially in Rome. Think wooden stools with a crescent-shaped hole, letting the baby drop while midwives play catch below. Serenus describes them, saying they ease the push. Fancy, right? Livia's probably on one, gripping armrests, cursing the gods. If she's rural, it's back to squatting or kneeling, maybe with a rope to pull for leverage. Midwives massage her belly, sometimes too hard, risking uterine tears. No epidurals, just willpower and maybe a swig of poppy juice, which is basically opium roulette. The social scene's a circus. Birth's a family affair now. Sisters, aunts, neighbors crowding the room, offering prayers to Artemis or Juno Lucina, goddess of childbirth who's apparently on a coffee break. Amulets are everywhere: crescent moons, amber beads, or little phallic charms. Yep, Romans love those, to ward off evil spirits. Absurd? You bet, but when your odds of dying are 1 in 60 per birth, you'll wear a bronze dongle too. Wall paintings from Pompeii show women in labor, surrounded by attendants, looking less serene and more "get this thing out of me." Rituals are big: incense burns, chants rise, and someone's sacrificing a dove for luck. Spoiler: doves don't stop hemorrhages. Let's crunch the numbers because they're brutal. Maternal mortality's down slightly, 1,400 to 1,800 per 100,000 births, thanks to better nutrition and midwives with actual training. But cities breed disease. Puerperal fever's a silent assassin, thriving in unwashed hands and dirty linens. Infant mortality still 25 to 35%, with causes like breech births, cord issues, or infections that no one understands. A grave from Roman Britain, 200 CE. A woman, early 20s, buried with a fetus, pelvis locked mid-delivery. The story's carved in bone, failure frozen in time. Livia pushes, sweat mixing with olive oil the midwives slather on. Complications are the usual suspects. Breech birth? Serenus suggests turning the baby externally, but it's a crapshoot. 50% chance of success, 50% chance of disaster. Hemorrhage? They pack the birth canal with linen or wool, but blood loss kills fast. Eclampsia, seizures from high blood pressure, strikes without warning. No one knows why, just that it's game over. Early C-sections exist, but only for dead moms to save babies. Think gruesome iron knife hack jobs. A Roman law, lex caesarea, mandates it for corpses, hence caesarean. Livia's not getting that luxury unless she's already gone. Success. Livia's baby, a girl, emerges, screaming like she's ready to conquer Gaul. The cord's cut with an iron scalpel, sharper but still a germ magnet. The placenta's buried or burned, maybe offered to Juno for brownie points. Livia's alive, but postpartum's a gauntlet. No sterile bandages, just linen strips washed in questionable water. Infections creep in, fever sets in days later, and no antibiotics exist. Breastfeeding's mandatory, but low milk means the baby's at risk. Wet nurses are more common now, especially for elite women, but they're not always available. If Livia's milk fails, it's mashed bread or goat milk, which might not cut it. The irony's thicker than Roman concrete. Civilization's peaking, philosophy, engineering, law. But childbirth's still a prehistoric death trap. Women start birthing at 13 to 15, churning out 6 to 10 kids to fuel empires. Each birth's a gamble, and the odds stack up. A study of Roman cemeteries, women's skeletons 20 to 30, show pelvic trauma, stress fractures, signs of exhaustion by 25. Men, hitting 40, remarrying, while women paid the price for Rome's glory. Progress? More like a blood tax. Culturally, it's a wild mix. Greek doctors like Galen pontificate about humors, blood, bile, phlegm, like that explains a stuck baby. Romans lean on superstition, a silver coin under the mat for luck, or a prayer to Diana. Absurd? Totally, but when your midwife's best tool is a guess, you hedge your bets. One find from Ephesus, a marble relief of a woman in labor, midwives at her side, gods watching, hope in stone form. Complications get uglier. Obstructed labor, baby jammed, pelvis too small, kills fast. Midwives might try desperate measures like breaking the baby's skull to save the mom. Serranus mentions it grimly. Hemorrhage remains a top killer. No transfusions, just panic. A skeleton from Herculaneum, 79 CE. A woman, pelvis fractured mid-birth, baby half out, frozen in agony. The community's role is double-edged. If Livia survives, she's a hero. Feasts, offerings to the gods, maybe a new necklace for her trouble. If she doesn't, the baby's adopted or buried with her. Roman graves often pair moms and infants, a trend that breaks your heart across centuries. Elite women get better care, cleaner rooms, trained midwives, but biology doesn't care about status. Empresses bled out too. Tech teases progress but falls short. Iron scalpels are sharper, but germs don't care. Early surgical tools exist, but they're for battlefield wounds, not OB/GYN. Midwives rely on experience, herbs, and grit. Some tricks work, yarrow for bleeding, squatting for leverage, but others, like toxic doses of rue, backfire. Knowledge is power, but it's still half-baked. Livia's teaching her daughter already, birthing lore, herb mixes, how to grit your teeth through the pain. The cycle continues, each generation dodging the same bullets. Cities add new risks. Crowded tenements breed disease. Water's cleaner but not clean enough. Rural women like Livia's cousins labor in fields, no midwives, just family and fate. Archaeology tells the final tales. A Greek site, 400 BCE, yields a woman's skeleton, pelvis widened, scars from multiple births. Nearby, infant bones, too fragile to last. Livia's fighting that fate, every push a rebellion against stats. As part 4 wraps, 2,100 words of classical age birthing chaos reflect on this. Humanity's building empires, but childbirth's still a brutal gatekeeper. Livia's survival, like Zara, Mara, and Tana's, is a defiant middle finger to nature's bad design. We've come full circle, from caves to columns, and yet the pain persists. Want to unpack this madness? Comment, what's next in Telvi? Forget everything you know about childbirth. Forget sterile rooms, epidurals, and doctors who actually wash their hands. We're going back to the Middle Ages, a time when bringing a new life into the world was less of a miracle and more of a high-stakes gamble with death himself, and your midwife might also be the person who hexes your cow. Welcome to the most terrifying, absurd, and frankly disgusting team-building exercise in history. Having a baby, medieval style. So, you're a woman in, let's say, the 14th century, and you're pregnant. Congratulations. You've successfully navigated the first hurdle of medieval womanhood. Your prize? An impending ordeal that makes the Hunger Games look like a pleasant weekend retreat. The first and most important thing to understand is that for this main event, there are absolutely no men allowed. Not your husband, not your father, and certainly not a doctor. A male physician of the era, who whose primary skills involved looking at your urine and confidently prescribing bloodletting for literally everything from a cough to demonic possession, was considered utterly clueless about the mysteries of the female body. His presence in the birthing chamber would be a scandal of epic proportions, an obscene intrusion into a sacred and exclusively female domain. This was known as the gossip's room, and it was a world unto itself, a secret society bound by blood, sweat, and terror. While the men were off doing important man things, like sharpening swords or arguing about the price of wool, the women were facing the raw, unfiltered reality of creation and death, all within the four walls of a stuffy, candlelit room. The space itself was a character in this drama. There was no pristine delivery suite. The birthing chamber was simply a room in your own house, probably the main bedchamber, which was meticulously prepared for the occasion. And by prepared, I mean it was turned into a sweltering, oxygen-deprived sauna from hell. Every window, every shutter, every crack and keyhole was sealed shut. This wasn't for privacy. It was to protect the mother and the unborn child from evil spirits, malevolent winds and miasmas, the bad air that was believed to carry disease. A large fire would be roaring in the hearth, regardless of whether it was a freezing January night or the middle of a blistering August heat wave. The goal was to keep the mother warm and her humors balanced, but the reality was a suffocating, smoke-filled chamber where the air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, sweat, and simmering herbal concoctions. It was less a place of healing and more of a perfectly engineered environment for cultivating bacteria and fainting spells. Now, let's talk about the furniture. You wouldn't be lying down in a comfortable, adjustable bed. Oh no, that would be far too logical. Instead, you might be perched precariously on a birthing stool. Picture a low, three-legged wooden stool with a U-shaped cutout in the seat. It looked less like a piece of medical equipment and more like something you'd find in a torture chamber. The idea, which was actually quite sound, was to use gravity to help the baby descend. But imagine trying to relax while balanced on this rickety contraption, your entire weight bearing down as your female relatives shout conflicting advice in your ear. If you were wealthy, you might have a more elaborate birthing chair, a larger, more throne-like piece of furniture, often ornately carved and passed down through generations. It was a status symbol, a way of saying, I can afford to face my potential demise in style. For the less fortunate, it was a simple stool, a pile of hay, or even just kneeling on the floor, supported by other women. The position was dynamic. You were encouraged to walk, to sway, to kneel, to find whatever posture worked. It was a chaotic, physical dance with mortality, and the room was filled with the sounds to match. The groaning, the chanting, and the endless overlapping chatter of the assembled women. This brings us to your support team. At the center of this maelstrom was the midwife. She was the director, the star player, and the sole authority in the room. She was not a trained medical professional in any modern sense. Her knowledge came from experience, from apprenticeships served under other midwives, and from a tradition of folk wisdom passed down from mother to daughter for centuries. She was usually an older woman, a mother many times over, respected for her steady hands and her calm demeanor in the face of panic. She was the neighborhood's expert on all things female. She could tell you how to encourage conception, how to identify a pregnancy, and how to handle the delivery, but her position was precarious. If the birth went well and a healthy baby was delivered, she was hailed as a hero, showered with gifts and praise. But if tragedy struck, if the mother or child died, a tragically common outcome, suspicion could quickly turn on her. Was her herbal remedy just a little too strange? Did she mutter an incantation that sounded less like a prayer and more like a curse? In an age rife with superstition, the line between a respected midwife and a suspected witch was terrifyingly thin. Her toolkit was not one of sterile instruments. It consisted of her hands, her knowledge of herbs and massage, olive oil to soften the perineum, clean linens, and a collection of prayers and charms. She was as much a spiritual guide as a physical one, charged with navigating the soul through this perilous journey as well as the body. And she wasn't alone. Surrounding the laboring woman and the midwife was a crowd of other women, known as the gossips. This is, in fact, the origin of our modern word. A gossip was originally a god sibling, a person spiritually related to you, who was present at the birth to act as a sponsor or witness for the baptism. Over time, it came to mean any female friend or neighbor who attended the birth, And they were not passive observers. This was an active participatory event. They were there to hold the mother up, to wipe her brow, to feed her sips of wine or broth, to pray in loud, rhythmic unison, and to offer a running commentary of advice, encouragement, and old wives' tales. "Push like you're angry at your husband," one might yell. "Remember to keep your mouth closed, or the baby will come out the wrong way," another would insist, with complete conviction. It was a chorus of female solidarity and overwhelming anxiety-inducing noise. They were the witnesses who could testify to the legitimacy of the birth, ensuring no one could claim the baby was a changeling swapped by fairies. They were the community, there to share in the joy or, more often than not, the grief. It was the original reality television show, and the stakes couldn't be higher. So, the stage is set. The room is sealed, the fire is blazing, the birthing stool awaits, and your all-female cast is assembled. The first twinges of labor begin. There's no calling the doctor for an update, no checking your pregnancy app. This is it, the great, terrifying unknown. And the first question on everyone's mind is, how do we manage the pain? The short, brutal answer is, you don't. Pain in childbirth was considered by the church to be a divine punishment, the curse of Eve, God's sentence on all women for her original sin in the Garden of Eden. To try and subvert or eliminate this pain was seen by some hardline theologians as a sin in itself, an act of defiance against God's will. Imagine being told that the most excruciating pain of your life was not only necessary but righteous. This belief wasn't universally held, and many people did everything they could to find some relief, but the shadow of Eve's curse loomed large over the entire experience. So what were the medieval equivalents of an epidural? They were a desperate, hopeful, and often bizarre cocktail of faith, folklore, and herbalism. You might be given a girdle to wear, one that had been blessed by a priest or had supposedly touched the relics of a saint, particularly the Virgin Mary. These birthing girdles were prized possessions loaned out to women in the community. You might be given eagle stones, which were actually hollow rocks with a smaller pebble rattling inside, believed to ease delivery when tied to the thigh. You'd be encouraged to drink concoctions of raspberry leaf tea, which we now know can help tone the uterus, but also potions made from powdered animal parts, strange herbs, and a healthy dose of wishful thinking. A sip of strong ale or wine wasn't just for courage, it was one of the few genuine painkillers available. Chanting was constant. The room would echo with prayers to Saint Margaret, the patron saint of childbirth, who, according to legend, was swallowed by a dragon and burst out of its belly unharmed. A rather graphic but hopefully inspiring metaphor for a successful birth. The psychological pressure was immense. You were not just a patient, you were a performer on a very public stage. You had to be brave, you had to be strong, and above all, you had to deliver. The entire future of your family, your husband's lineage, could rest on this one event, and the pressure for a son was overwhelming. Delivering a daughter was fine, but a son was a victory. As the hours, or even days, wore on, the atmosphere in the hot, crowded room would intensify. The initial supportive chatter might give way to more urgent prayers, the midwife's calm instructions becoming more firm. She would be constantly checking the mother, using her oiled hands to feel the progress, to assess the baby's position, a skill honed over countless births. She might try to manually turn a baby that was in a breech position, a risky and painful maneuver that required immense skill and no small amount of luck. She would massage the mother's belly with oils, encouraging the baby to move down. She would manage the constant flow of women, keeping the most hysterical gossips at bay, while utilizing the most helpful ones to hold the mother's legs or provide a steady presence. She was a master of psychological manipulation, knowing when to offer a comforting word, when to tell a bawdy joke to break the tension, and when to command the room with unshakable authority. She had seen it all. The swift, easy births that were over in a few hours, and the grueling marathons that stretched into a second or even third day, pushing the mother to the absolute limits of human endurance. And she knew the signs. She knew the smell of infection. She knew the look of a mother who was losing too much blood, and she knew the terrifying stillness that meant the baby was no longer moving. This was the moment her traditional knowledge was put to the ultimate test. The herbs, the prayers, the repositioning techniques. This was all she had. There was no backup. There was no calling for a surgical team. There was only this room, these women, and the desperate hope that nature, With a little help from Saint, Margaret would find a way. But what happens when nature fails? What happens when the baby is stuck, when the mother is exhausted and bleeding, when the midwife's experience reaches its limit and the air in the room turns from hopeful prayer to palpable fear? This is the point where the story transitions from a tale of endurance to a true medieval nightmare. The gentle, supportive world of the gossips and the midwife is about to collide with the brutal reality of medieval intervention. The line has been crossed from a natural process to a desperate medical emergency, and the tools available were not designed for saving lives, but for extracting a baby at any cost. So you think you've seen it all? We haven't even gotten to the part with the emergency baptisms for babies half-born, the sharp hooks, and the destructive interventions that would make a horror movie director blush. If you thought this was bad, you have no idea what's coming. The real terror hasn't even begun. Tell us in the comments, what do you think was the most terrifying part of this medieval birthing room so far? The sealed windows, the torture stool, or the fact that your pain was considered a divine punishment? Let us know what you think, and make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because in part 2, we open the midwife's secret bag of tricks for when everything goes wrong. And trust me, you'll need a stiff drink for that one. Welcome back to the medieval birthing chamber, the hottest, most exclusive, and most terrifying club in the 14th century. In our last episode, we set the scene: the sweltering, sealed room, the all-female cast of gossips, the saint-invoking, herb-wielding midwife, and you, the star of the show, perched on a birthing stool, trying to push a human being out of your body, while being told the searing pain is God's personal punishment for that little incident with the apple. We left off at the precise moment when things stop being a difficult labor and start spiraling into a full-blown, panic-inducing medieval catastrophe. The baby isn't coming. The hours have bled into a day, and now the day is threatening to become 2. The encouraging chants to Saint Margaret are starting to sound a little strained, and the air, already thick with smoke and sweat, is now heavy with the metallic tang of fear. The midwife's calm facade is still there, but her eyes tell a different story. It's time to open the medieval equivalent of Pandora's box. It's time for interventions. First, let's try some good old-fashioned physics. Is the baby in a funny position? Maybe it just needs a little persuasion. One of the more creative techniques was to lay the laboring mother on a large sheet or blanket. Then 2 or 4 strong women would grab the corners, hoist her into the air, and shake her vigorously. The goal, presumably, was to jiggle the baby into a more favorable head-down position. Imagine this. You are at the peak of exhaustion and agony, and your well-meaning friends have just turned you into a human maraca. It's a perfect example of the medieval mindset. If gentle doesn't work, try violent. It's a miracle they didn't just hold women upside down by their ankles and shake them, although I wouldn't be surprised if that was tried somewhere too. If the human cocktail shaker method failed, the midwife might escalate to more potent herbal remedies. She'd move on from the gentle raspberry leaf tea to something with a bit more kick. She might prepare a potion with savin, pennyroyal, or the most powerful and dangerous of them all, ergot. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye, and it causes powerful, violent uterine contractions. It's also a deadly poison. Administering it was the medieval equivalent of playing Russian roulette with a herbal remedy. Give too little and nothing happens. Give too much and you could cause the uterus to rupture, kill the baby from the force of the contractions, and poison the mother. But in the face of certain death, a slim chance of survival offered by a toxic fungus seemed like a reasonable bet. But the greatest terror, the one that haunted every midwife and mother, was the obstructed birth. The baby is well and truly stuck. Maybe the baby is sideways, a transverse lie, with an arm presenting instead of a head. Maybe the mother's pelvis is simply too narrow. Whatever the reason, the passage is blocked. The mother is exhausted, her strength is gone, and the baby has likely been without oxygen for too long. This is the moment when the entire focus of the room shifts. The goal is no longer about delivering a healthy baby. The joyous anticipation has evaporated, replaced by a grim, desperate calculation. The new goal is to save the mother's life, and even more importantly, to save the baby's soul. According to Catholic doctrine, an unbaptized soul could not enter heaven. It would be condemned to limbo for all eternity. This was a horror almost greater than death itself for the medieval mind. So, if the midwife determined that the baby was dying, or was already dead within the womb, a terrible and surreal emergency procedure would begin. The midwife, who was granted special permission by the church for this very purpose, had to perform an emergency baptism. If any part of the baby was visible, a hand, a foot, a sliver of scalp, she would pour blessed water onto it and recite the holy words, "If thou art alive, I baptize thee in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost." It got even more complicated. Theologians debated whether a baptism was valid if you couldn't tell which body part you were anointing. Manuals for midwives specified how to handle this. If the head of the child appears, do not baptize it until the whole body is born. But if you are afraid the child will die before it can be fully born, baptize it on the head. If another part of the body appears, such as a hand or a foot, then you shall baptize it on that part. Some midwives even used long spoons or syringes to try and get the holy water to the baby's head inside the birth canal. It was a frantic, desperate race against time to cheat the devil and ensure the tiniest soul didn't spend eternity in spiritual darkness. Once the soul was hopefully secured, the grim work of saving the mother could begin. The baby, now tragically considered an obstruction, had to be removed. This is where the midwife's bag of secrets was opened and the instruments came out. And these were not the sleek, life-saving instruments of modern medicine. These were tools of destruction. The primary instrument for a dead or dying baby was the sharp hook, known as a crochet or uncus. It was a long metal rod with a sharp, curved hook at the end. Its function was brutal and simple: to be inserted into the birth canal, hooked into a part of the baby, the skull, an eye socket, the jaw, and used to pull the body out, often in pieces. This procedure was known as an embryotomy. It was a horrifying and bloody and dangerous task, performed entirely by feel in a cramped and frantic environment. The midwife had to have nerves of steel and an intimate, tactile knowledge of anatomy to perform this without shredding the mother's uterus and bladder, which would kill her anyway from hemorrhage or infection. It was the absolute last resort, a choice made in hell, sacrificing the body of the child to save the life of the mother. Sometimes other instruments were used, like a cranioclast, designed to crush the baby's skull to make it smaller and easier to extract. This was the dark side of the midwife's trade, the part that was never spoken of in cheerful village gossip, the grim reality that lay beneath the prayers and the lucky charms. She was not just a bringer of life, sometimes she had to be a manager of death. Now, you might be asking, where were the men in all of this? We said they were banned, but surely in a life or death crisis, they would bring in a male surgeon. The answer is yes, but only when all hope was well and truly lost. Calling in a man was the ultimate admission of failure. It meant the midwife, with all her knowledge and her terrifying hooks, had failed. It meant the mother was already dead or actively dying. The male physician, or more likely, the barber surgeon, a man whose trade was as much about cutting hair and pulling teeth as it was about crude surgery, was not called to save the mother. He was called for one reason, and one reason only: the post-mortem cesarean section. This wasn't a cesarean section as we know it, a sterile operation to deliver a healthy baby from a healthy mother. This was an ancient procedure, mandated by Roman law and reinforced by the church, that stated if a pregnant woman died, her baby had to be cut from her womb immediately. The goal once again was not to get a living baby. While that would be a miraculous bonus, the true purpose was to get the baby out and baptize it before the mother's body grew cold and the baby's soul was lost forever. So picture the final tragic scene. The gossips, weeping, finally unseal the door and windows. The sacred, exclusively female space is breached. The husband, numb with grief, gives his consent. The barber surgeon enters not with the tools of a healer, but with the knives of a butcher. He makes a crude, swift incision into the abdomen of the dead or dying woman, reaches in and pulls the baby out. A priest or the midwife would be standing by with holy water, ready to perform the baptism on the limp, lifeless infant. This was the final act of the drama, a last desperate attempt to snatch a single soul from the jaws of eternal damnation, performed on the tragic stage of the mother's body. There was virtually no chance of the mother surviving this procedure. Until the late 19th century, a cesarean section was a death sentence. There was no understanding of germ theory, no effective anesthesia beyond a swig of alcohol, and no way to control the bleeding or inevitable infection that followed. So the options in a catastrophic birth were stark and brutal. You could be shaken like a dusty rug. You could be poisoned with powerful herbs. You could be subjected to a destructive procedure with a sharp hook. Or You could die, at which point a man with a knife would perform a crude operation on your corpse to save your baby's soul. These were the choices. This was the reality of a system operating at the absolute edge of human knowledge, armed with little more than faith, folklore, and a few terrifying pieces of metal. It's a miracle anyone survived at all. And yet, they did. Women endured this, and humanity continued. But survival of the birth itself was only half the battle. An entirely new set of dangers awaited the mother and her newborn child in the days and weeks that followed. The threat of invisible enemies, the childbed fever, was just as deadly as a sharp hook, and the rituals and superstitions surrounding the postpartum period were just as bizarre as the ones in the birthing room. What do you think was the most horrifying intervention? The shaking blanket, the poisonous ergot, or the destructive sharp hook? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And make sure you are subscribed, because in part 3, we will delve into the terrifying aftermath of birth, the mysterious and deadly puerperal fever, the strange 40-day quarantine for new mothers, and the bizarre rituals to protect a newborn from being stolen by fairies. The nightmare isn't over yet. Alright, you survived the main event. Congratulations. You made it through the medieval marathon of labor. You avoided the human cocktail shaker, and you managed to keep all your internal organs inside your body, even when the midwife was considering her options with a rather menacing-looking sharp hook. The baby is here. You can hear it crying. The gossips are cooing. A wave of relief washes over you. The worst is over. You did it. Now you can finally get some rest, maybe a breath of fresh air, and enjoy your beautiful new... Oh, wait. Number. Absolutely not. Welcome to part 3 of your medieval nightmare, because surviving the birth was just the tutorial level. Now you get to play the main game, the treacherous, terrifying, and frankly unhygienic world of postpartum recovery. The next 40 days will be a masterclass in psychological warfare, supernatural paranoia, and a one-on-one battle with an invisible enemy that killed more new mothers than childbirth itself. Your new home for the next 40 days and 40 nights is the very same room you just turned into a sweaty, smoke-filled war zone. This period was known as the lying in, and it sounds almost pleasant, doesn't it? A mandatory rest period, a medieval spa retreat, 40 days of bed rest being waited on hand and foot. It's a modern mother's dream, but the medieval reality was, as always, so much worse. The windows and doors remain sealed shut. The fire continues to roar, even if it's the middle of July. The miasmas, those pesky, evil vapors, are still considered a major threat to a new mother and her fragile infant, who are seen as uniquely vulnerable to sickness and demonic influence. So you are confined to this dark, stuffy, overheated chamber, a space that is rapidly becoming a petri dish for every conceivable pathogen. The air is stale, thick with the lingering smells of birth, sweat, and now, the ever-present aroma of soured milk and dirty linens. There is no concept of changing the sheets daily. Clean linen was a luxury, and the constant bleeding after birth, the lochia, was just another part of the messy reality. You are stewing in a bed that is a perfect, warm, moist environment for breeding bacteria. Your spa retreat is a biological hazard zone. During this time, you were considered both a hero and a pariah. On one hand, you had fulfilled your primary function as a woman. You produced an heir, hopefully a son, securing your husband's lineage and your own status within the household. You would be brought restorative foods, not for you a simple bowl of gruel. If your family had any means, you'd be fed rich broths, roasted chicken, and above all, a constant supply of caudle. A caudle was a warm, thick, alcoholic beverage, a sort of medieval protein shake, made from ale or wine, thickened with eggs and breadcrumbs and sweetened with sugar and spices. It was designed to restore your strength, warm your humors, and probably keep you too blissfully buzzed to fully comprehend the peril you were in. But on the other hand, you were considered ritually impure. Childbirth, with all its blood and bodily fluids, rendered you unclean in the eyes of the church. You were barred from attending Mass, from leaving your home, from rejoining the community. You were in quarantine, a sacred and profane creature, celebrated for your fertility, but shunned for its physical consequences. You were a walking, or rather a lying down contradiction. But the stale air and the social isolation were not the real enemy. There was a killer in the room with you, an invisible, insidious specter that haunted every new mother's bed. It didn't have a name, not a proper one. They called it childbed fever or puerperal fever, and it was the true monster of this story. One day, maybe 3 or 4 days after a perfectly successful birth, you would feel a sudden chill, a deep, bone-rattling cold that no roaring fire could warm. Then came the fever, a raging inferno that would leave you delirious. Your abdomen would swell and become exquisitely tender to the touch, and a foul-smelling discharge would signal that something inside was rotting. There was nothing they could do. They had no idea what it was. They blamed it on an imbalance of humors, on a putrefaction of retained blood, on a chill from a stray draft of evil air. They had absolutely no concept of germs. The tragic irony is that the killer was often brought into the room by the very people meant to help. The midwife with her unwashed hands could carry the deadly streptococcus bacteria from one birthing bed to the next, a silent angel of death. The linens, not properly cleaned, could harbor the infection. The entire environment, so carefully sealed to keep evil out, was actually trapping the real evil inside. A male physician, had he been allowed in, would have been no better. In fact, he might have been worse, coming directly from tending a patient with a gangrenous wound, or even more horrifyingly, from a dissection, with the germs of the dead still clinging to his hands and clothes. It would take another 500 years for a Hungarian doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis to make the revolutionary, and at the time, widely mocked suggestion that doctors should simply wash their hands between patients. He was ridiculed and professionally ruined for this simple, life-saving idea, but in your 14th century bed, that knowledge is centuries away. You are at the mercy of an enemy you cannot see, and the fever will run its course, leading almost inevitably to sepsis, shock, and a lonely, agonizing death, just days after the triumph of giving birth. Surviving the birth itself was a gamble. Surviving the week after was playing against a house that always wins. But let's say you are incredibly, unbelievably lucky. Your iron constitution, or sheer dumb luck, has allowed you to dodge the fever. You are weak, you are confined, but you are alive. Now your paranoia can shift from yourself to your newborn, because the physical threats were only half the story. The supernatural threats were considered just as real and far more cunning. Your beautiful, healthy baby was now the prime target for a terrifying paranormal kidnapping. The culprits? Fairies. And these aren't the tiny, sparkly Tinkerbell-type fairies of modern cartoons. Medieval fairies were powerful, terrifying, and amoral beings from another world. And there was nothing they wanted more than a healthy human infant. The belief was that fairies would sneak into the lying-in chamber, steal the human baby, and leave in its place one of their own, a changeling. A changeling looked at first like a human baby, but it was anything but. It was a sickly, pining creature that would fail to thrive. It would cry incessantly, refuse to eat, and waste away. Or it might be hideously deformed, or have developmental disabilities that would become apparent over time. The changeling myth was the medieval world's explanation for a host of tragic infant conditions we now understand medically. Sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, birth defects, severe allergies, or neurological disorders. It was easier for a grieving parent to believe their perfect child had been stolen by malevolent magic than to accept the cruel randomness of nature or a congenital defect. Blaming a fairy was a way to process incomprehensible tragedy. So, how did you protect your baby from these supernatural thieves? With a whole arsenal of superstitious security measures. The baby was never, ever to be left alone in the room. A constant vigil was maintained. The fire in the hearth wasn't just for warmth. The light and flames were believed to repel the creatures of the night. An object made of iron, a pair of scissors, a knife, even a simple nail would be placed in the cradle. Iron was the ultimate fairy kryptonite, a metal they could not abide. A red thread might be tied around the baby's wrist, as the color red was thought to offer protection. The baby might be dressed in its father's shirt, the adult male garment acting as a sort of magical shield. The entire room became a fortress of folk magic, a web of salt, steel, and candlelight designed to thwart an invisible invasion. And God forbid if you suspected your baby was a changeling. The cures were horrific, designed to torture the fairy creature so badly that its own mother would be forced to come and reclaim it, returning the stolen human child. These methods included leaving the suspected changeling on a hot shovel over a fire, dunking it in a freezing river, or abandoning it on a hillside overnight. It's a stomach-turning glimpse into the desperation and fear that governed their world, where the line between protecting a child and destroying one was horrifyingly blurred by superstition. Finally, if you and your baby managed to survive the fever, the fairies, and the 40 days of suffocating confinement, the ordeal was finally over. But you couldn't just walk out the door and go back to your life. There was one final ritual, the churching of women. On or around the 40th day, you would get dressed in your finest clothes, and, accompanied by your female gossips, you would walk to the parish church for the first time since giving birth. You would wait at the church door, as your unclean state still forbade you from entering freely. The priest would come out to meet you. He would recite psalms of thanksgiving for your survival and prayers of purification. He would sprinkle you with holy water, symbolically washing away the ritual impurity of childbirth. Then he would lead you into the church, sometimes having you hold the end of his priestly stole, and guide you to a place of honor near the altar. It was a public celebration, a massive sigh of relief from the entire community. It was a thanksgiving for the new life, a formal welcoming of the baby into the Christian world, and your official graduation from the hell of the lying-in period. You had faced death, disease, and demons, and you had won. You were finally clean, you were finally safe, you were finally back among the living. But this whole saga wasn't just a private family affair. Every birth had legal and social consequences that rippled throughout the community. What if the legitimacy of the child was questioned? What happened to a midwife whose patients always seemed to die of that mysterious fever? Was it bad luck, or was it something more sinister? What happened when men, for the first time, tried to stick their noses and their newfangled printing presses into this exclusively female world? The story isn't over. Which do you think was the greater threat, the invisible bacteria of childbed fever, or the invisible fairies lurking in the shadows? Tell us your biggest fear in the comments, and make sure you subscribe, because in our final part, we're leaving the birthing chamber and entering the courtroom. We're talking inheritance disputes, accusations of witchcraft, and the very first printed books that tried to unravel the secrets of women for all the world to see. You made it. You survived the birth, you dodged the childbed fever, you convinced your paranoid relatives that your baby wasn't a fairy imposter, and you finally walked out of that suffocating, smoke-filled room and into the light of the church. You are clean, you are a mother, you are a survivor. The nightmare is over, except it's not. The physical ordeal may be finished, but now you must navigate the treacherous social and legal minefield that is medieval society. The most dangerous part of having a baby wasn't always the birth itself. It was approving who it belonged to, dealing with the consequences when things went wrong, and fighting to keep control of a process that men were suddenly, desperately trying to understand and monetize. Welcome to the final act, the after-party of litigation, accusation, and the scandalous intrusion of men into the secrets of women. Let's start with the most important thing in the medieval world. Property, land, titles, money, power. All of it depended on one simple, fragile thing, a legitimate heir. A son. You haven't just delivered a baby, you've delivered the future of your family line, and everyone has an opinion about it. Remember the gossips, that chorus of female friends and neighbors who were there for the main event? Their role was about to become critically important. They weren't just there to offer conflicting advice and witness your agony. They were the official, legally recognized witnesses of the birth. In a world with no DNA tests, no birth certificates, their collective testimony was the only thing that stood between your child's legitimate inheritance and total destitution. If a bitter, childless relative of your husband decided to question your child's paternity, it would be the gossips who would march into court and swear on a holy relic that they saw the baby emerge from your body with their own 2 eyes. They were your living, breathing proof of legitimacy, the guardians of the bloodline. Their testimony could secure a duchy for your son or see him cast out as a bastard. It was the original Maury Povich show, but with far higher stakes and worse fashion. This system got even more bizarre and invasive if your husband was unfortunate enough to die while you were pregnant. Suddenly, your swollen belly became a ticking time bomb of inheritance. Your late husband's greedy brothers or cousins, seeing their potential inheritance about to be snatched away by a baby they claimed wasn't his, could legally challenge the very existence of your pregnancy. And how did the medieval legal system solve this delicate problem? With a jury of matrons, of course. A court could order a group of respectable, experienced mothers to perform a physical examination of you to determine if you were, in fact, pregnant. Imagine this. You are a grieving widow, and a committee of your female neighbors is legally empowered to grope you, poke your belly, and collectively decide if you're faking it to defraud your in-laws. It's a shocking invasion of privacy, but it's also a fascinating example of a rare moment of female legal authority. In this one specific area, the knowledge residing in women's bodies and experiences was given the full weight of the law. Their word was final. It was a world where a woman's touch could determine the fate of a fortune. But what about the woman at the center of it all? The midwife? What happened when things didn't end with a healthy baby and a celebratory churching? What happened when babies died, or mothers succumbed to the childbed fever? One tragic death could be explained away as God's will. Two could be seen as terrible misfortune. But three, four, a pattern of death surrounding a single midwife would inevitably turn whispers of bad luck into shouts of something far more sinister: witchcraft. The midwife's position was one of terrifying duality. She was revered for her secret knowledge, but that very same knowledge made her a prime target for accusation. She knew about herbs, like the powerful and dangerous ergot. To one family, it was a life-saving medicine used to stop a hemorrhage. To a grieving, suspicious family, it was a poison she used to murder their loved one. She muttered chants and prayers during labor. Were they appeals to Saint Margaret, or were they incantations to Satan? She may have had to perform a horrifying embryotomy, destroying a dead baby to save the mother. To an outside observer, this could be twisted into a story of her cutting up babies for nefarious magical rituals. This wasn't just idle village gossip. It was codified in one of the most infamous books ever printed, the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches, published in 1487. This chilling witch-hunting manual specifically identified midwives as the most likely of all people to be witches. The authors argued that because midwives worked in secret, in a sacred space forbidden to men, they had the perfect opportunity to offer newborns to demons, or to kill unbaptized infants to use their tiny bodies in potions and flying ointments. The book states, with terrifying authority, no one does more harm to the Catholic faith than midwives. The very act that defined her profession, her exclusive access to the moment of creation, was twisted into her greatest liability. The skills that made her a healer could be presented in a courtroom as the tools of a monster. A steady hand, a knowledge of folk remedies, and a calm demeanor in the face of death, all the qualities of a good midwife, were also, conveniently, the signs of a pact with the devil. Her sacred knowledge made her powerful, and in the paranoid world of late medieval Europe, female power was a thing to be feared, controlled, and all too often extinguished at the stake. For centuries, this world, with all its triumphs and terrors, had belonged to women. But two inventions were about to shatter that monopoly forever: the printing press and a little metal tool. With the rise of printing, knowledge could be spread like wildfire, and a new class of educated men, full of Renaissance curiosity, wanted to know everything, including the one thing they had always been barred from: the secrets of the female body. Suddenly, books began to appear with titles like The Secrets of Women, written by male university physicians who had likely never witnessed a single birth. They were filled with anatomical drawings, theories about humors, and often wildly inaccurate advice. This was a hostile takeover. The intimate, hands-on, traditional knowledge of the midwife was being challenged by the theoretical, text-based knowledge of men. And then came the ultimate weapon in this hostile takeover: the forceps. The invention of obstetric forceps in the 17th century by the Chamberlain family is one of the most bizarre and selfish stories in medical history. The Chamberlains were a family of men midwives, or accoucheurs, who created a tool that could safely grip a baby's head and guide it out during an obstructed labor, potentially saving both mother and child without it resorting to the destructive hooks of the past. It was a revolutionary, life-saving invention, and they kept it a secret for over 100 years. They treated their invention not as a gift to humanity, but as a trade secret, a tool for personal profit. They would arrive at a birth with their forceps hidden inside an ornate locked box. To maintain the mystery, they would work under a sheet, so no one, not even the laboring mother, could see the miraculous instrument they were using. They became rich and famous, the go-to experts for difficult births, all while countless women and babies died who could have been saved if the knowledge had been shared. This story perfectly marks the turning point. Childbirth was shifting from a communal, female-led experience to a medicalized, male-dominated procedure. The power was moving from the hands of the midwife to the instruments of the doctor. The female body was no longer a sacred mystery to be navigated with prayer and experience, but a machine that could be manipulated and fixed with metal tools. While of this shift would eventually lead to the incredible safety of modern obstetrics, it came at a cost. The community of gossips was replaced by a sterile operating theater. The spiritual and communal rite of passage became a clinical event. So, from the sealed room to the sterile room, the journey of childbirth is a journey through the very heart of human history. It's a story of incredible endurance, of mind-boggling superstition, of female solidarity, and of the slow, often brutal march of science. The women of the Middle Ages navigated a world we can barely imagine, armed with little more than courage, community, and a deep-seated knowledge that was both their greatest asset and their most profound vulnerability. They faced death to bring life, and their stories, whispered in the gossip's room and silenced by the historian's pen, deserve to be told. They are the true, unsung heroines of our survival. So, what do you think is the most shocking part of this whole medieval ordeal? The fact that your friend's testimony could decide your child's fortune, that your midwife could be burned as a witch for doing her job, or that a family of doctors hid a life-saving invention for a century just to make more money? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for taking this terrifying journey back in time with us. And remember, no matter how bad your day is going, at least you're not trying to prove to a jury of matrons that you're actually pregnant. Picture this. You're 9 months pregnant, your water just broke, and outside your window, enemy artillery is playing the world's most terrifying percussion solo. Your husband is somewhere on a battlefield eating mud and praying to whatever deity handles trench warfare. Your doctor fled the city 3 weeks ago, and your midwife just informed you she's fresh out of literally everything except prayers and dirty rags. Welcome to childbirth during wartime, where bringing life into the world required more courage than charging into battle, and significantly less glory. Throughout history, while men were busy making war, women were busy making humans under the most spectacularly awful conditions imaginable. And if you think modern hospital births are stressful, wait until you hear about giving birth in a bomb shelter with nothing but candlelight and the soothing sounds of civilization collapsing around you. Comment below if you think you could handle medieval battlefield obstetrics, because spoiler alert, you probably couldn't. Let's start our journey in medieval Europe, where childbirth was already a Russian roulette of medieval proportions, and war just added extra bullets to the chamber. During the 100 Years' War, which lasted approximately 99 years longer than anyone's patience, pregnant women faced a delightful menu of options when labor began. Option 1. Hope the siege ends before your contractions do. Option 2. Give birth while your city burns. Option 3. Flee to the countryside and deliver your baby in a ditch like some sort of extremely pregnant refugee. Medieval warfare had this charming habit of turning entire regions into apocalyptic hellscapes. When armies approached, towns would either surrender, get sieged until everyone inside looked like walking skeletons, or get sacked with all the subtlety of a hurricane having a particularly bad day. Pregnant women caught in these situations had to make impossible choices: stay and risk giving birth during a massacre, or flee and risk giving birth on the road to nowhere. The lucky ones made it to monasteries or convents, where nuns with absolutely zero medical training but maximum dedication would do their best impression of medieval paramedics. These holy women had read exactly one book about childbirth, written by a man who had never seen a woman give birth, based on theories from ancient Greece that were already wrong when they were written. The medical advice of the era can be summarized as: pray harder, bleed the patient, and if all else fails, consult your horoscope. But here's where it gets really fun. Medieval armies didn't just destroy infrastructure, they were infrastructure. When soldiers moved through an area, they took or destroyed everything useful, including food, medicine, and anyone who might know anything about delivering babies. Midwives, being practical people, tended to evacuate with everyone else who valued their lives. This left pregnant women with the medical expertise of whoever happened to be hiding in the same cellar, which usually amounted to old Martha, who once helped deliver a calf and thought the principles might be similar. The siege of Orleans during the 100 Years' War provides a perfect example of wartime obstetrics at its most medieval. Women trapped inside the city for months faced malnutrition that would make modern diet culture look generous. Pregnant women were literally starving while trying to grow entire humans inside them. When labor began, there was no anesthesia, no sterile instruments, no antibiotics, and definitely no epidurals. There was, however, plenty of screaming, both from the mothers and from the enemy catapults hurling diseased animals over the city walls. Imagine trying to push out a baby while someone outside is actively trying to murder everyone you've ever met. The midwives who remained worked by candlelight, using instruments that had been sterilized in the same way medieval people sterilized everything. They didn't. Hot water was a luxury when fuel was scarce and wells might be poisoned. Clean cloth was rarer than unicorns, and privacy was a concept that died along with the city's defenses. The real heroes of medieval wartime births were the women who attended other women in labor. With no formal medical training and equipped with folk wisdom that was part medicine, part superstition, and part desperate improvisation, they did their best to keep mothers and babies alive. Their techniques included holding crosses, burning herbs that may or may not have had actual medicinal properties, and reciting prayers in Latin that nobody present actually understood, but everyone hoped might influence divine intervention. These medieval midwives had to work with whatever materials they could scavenge. Clean linens became bandages for wounded soldiers, so births happened on straw that had been used for everything from animal bedding to absorbing blood from battlefield casualties. Medicinal herbs were either requisitioned by armies or burned when cities were sacked. Pain relief consisted of biting down on leather straps or wooden sticks, assuming you could find either in a city under siege. The mortality rates were spectacular in the worst possible way. Modern maternal mortality in developed countries hovers around 0.02%. Medieval maternal mortality during peacetime was roughly 20 times higher. During wartime, with malnutrition, stress, lack of medical care, and the general tendency of armies to make everything worse, the numbers became truly horrific. For every 10 women who went into labor during a siege, maybe 6 would survive the experience. For babies, the odds were even worse, but medieval women were made of steel wrapped in determination and coated with pure stubbornness. They had been raised in a world where death was a constant companion, where entire families could be wiped out by a bad harvest or a particularly enthusiastic plague. Giving birth during war was just another Tuesday in the endless parade of medieval horrors. They faced labor with the same grim pragmatism they applied to everything else. Do what you can with what you have, pray to whatever saint handles obstetrics, and hope for the best while preparing for the worst. The psychological trauma was its own special kind of medieval nightmare. Imagine going through the most physically intense experience of your life, while listening to the sounds of your neighbors being slaughtered, your home being burned, and your entire world being systematically destroyed. The stress hormones alone were probably enough to complicate any birth, but medieval women didn't have the luxury of trauma counseling, or even the basic understanding that extreme stress might affect pregnancy outcomes. Write in the comments what you think was the most challenging part of medieval wartime births, because honestly, picking just one seems impossible when literally everything was trying to kill everyone all the time. By the Renaissance, you'd think humanity might have figured out slightly better ways to handle pregnant women during wartime. You'd be adorably wrong. The 16th and 17th centuries brought us the 30 Years' War, a conflict so catastrophically destructive that it makes modern horror movies look like children's bedtime stories. This wasn't just war. This was war with a PhD in making everything worse, and pregnant women were about to get a masterclass in Renaissance-era suffering. The 30 Years' War turned Central Europe into a hellscape so complete that entire regions lost up to 60% of their population. When armies marched through towns, they didn't just take supplies, they took everything that wasn't nailed down, and then they took the nails. Pregnant women found themselves in a world where the concept of civilian protection was about as real as unicorns, and significantly less useful. Let's talk about the siege of Magdeburg in 1631. Where imperial forces turned a prosperous city into what contemporary accounts described as a vision of hell itself. Women who went into labor during the siege had to contend with starvation so severe that people were eating leather, bark, and things we won't discuss in polite company. The lucky ones gave birth in cellars while the city burned above them. The unlucky ones gave birth in the streets while soldiers decided whether rape, murder, or looting should take priority in their busy schedules of atrocity. Renaissance medicine had made some progress since medieval times, which is like saying a broken leg is better than being completely dead. Doctors now had slightly more sophisticated theories about why women died in childbirth, though their solutions remained roughly as effective as medieval prayers, but with more expensive equipment. They discovered anatomy, sort of, mostly by dissecting male corpses and assuming women were just men with different plumbing, and a tendency toward hysteria. The era's medical texts, written exclusively by men who had never been present at a birth, contained advice that ranged from merely useless to actively homicidal. They recommended bloodletting during pregnancy, which was like treating dehydration with more dehydration. They prescribed mercury for various ailments, apparently unaware that mercury is roughly as healthy as eating liquid death, and their understanding of infection was so primitive that they considered pus a sign of healthy healing, which explains why so many Renaissance patients died of things that should have been survivable. But wartime took these already questionable medical practices and made them infinitely worse. During the 30 Years' War, trained physicians fled conflict zones faster than rats abandoned sinking ships. This left pregnant women with the medical expertise of whoever happened to be hiding in the same ruins, which usually meant combat veterans whose surgical experience was limited to battlefield amputations and barber surgeons whose primary qualification was owning sharp objects. Army camps presented their own special brand of obstetric nightmare. Military wives and camp followers who became pregnant faced conditions that would horrify modern refugee camps. These women lived in temporary shelters that offered all the comfort and privacy of sleeping in a swamp during a thunderstorm. When labor began, they were attended by other camp women whose medical training consisted entirely of having survived their own pregnancies, assuming they had. The hygiene in military camps was so spectacularly awful that it became a weapon of war in itself. Armies killed more people through disease than combat, and pregnant women were sitting ducks in this bacterial shooting gallery. Typhus, dysentery, and plague moved through camps like wildfire through dry grass. A woman going into labor in these conditions was essentially playing Russian roulette with every disease known to Renaissance medicine, plus several that wouldn't be discovered until much later. Camp births happened in tents that had been used for everything from storing gunpowder to housing wounded soldiers still bleeding from recent battles. The same water used for drinking was used for washing, cooking, and cleaning wounds, creating a bacterial soup that would make modern sewage look sterile. Clean linens were a fantasy. Most births happened on whatever fabric could be scrounged up, which often meant cloth that had already served multiple tours of duty as bandages, bedding, or emergency tourniquets. Pain management during Renaissance wartime births consisted of biting down on whatever was available and trying not to scream loud enough to attract enemy attention. Some lucky women might get alcohol, assuming the army hadn't drunk it all or used it to clean wounds. Others might get opium-based preparations, if any could be found, and if anyone knew how to use them without accidentally killing the patient. Most got nothing except the dubious comfort of knowing their suffering was helping to populate future armies. The Spanish siege of Leiden in 1574 provides a perfect example of Renaissance wartime obstetrics. Women trapped inside the city faced months of starvation, while Spanish forces tried to starve them into submission. Pregnant women were literally eating their own bodies to keep their babies alive, then giving birth to infants who were already malnourished before they took their first breath. The midwives who remained worked without proper food, medicine, or supplies, delivering babies in a city where cats and dogs had become luxury meals and tree bark was considered fine dining. But here's where Renaissance warfare added its own special twist to the medieval playbook of horrors. The era's military technology had advanced just enough to make everything more lethal without making anything safer. Cannon fire could level buildings with pregnant women inside faster than medieval catapults, but medical care hadn't improved enough to deal with the consequences. Gunpowder weapons created wounds that medieval physicians couldn't understand, let alone treat, and the smoke and noise of Renaissance battles added new layers of trauma to an already traumatic experience. The psychological warfare was particularly sophisticated during this period. Armies deliberately targeted civilian populations to break enemy morale, which meant pregnant women were often specific targets rather than unfortunate collateral damage. The Spanish sack of Antwerp in 1576 included systematic attacks on pregnant women as a terror tactic. Women going into labor during such attacks had to worry not just about surviving childbirth, but about protecting their babies from soldiers who viewed infant mortality as a military objective. Religious warfare added another layer of complexity to Renaissance birth trauma. The 30 Years' War was partly a religious conflict, which meant that finding a midwife of the right denomination could be a matter of life and death. Catholic midwives in Protestant territories, or vice versa, faced persecution that could leave pregnant women without any assistance at all. Some women died in labor simply because the only available midwife belonged to the wrong church, and helping her would be considered treason. The era's superstitions around pregnancy and childbirth became weaponized during wartime. Armies spread rumors about curses and divine punishment to terrorize pregnant women in enemy territories. Some military commanders believed that targeting pregnant women would bring divine favor to their cause. Others thought that sparing them might anger God and bring defeat. Either way, pregnant women found themselves caught between competing religious fanaticism and military pragmatism, both of which treated their lives as expendable. Tell me in the comments which you think was worse: medieval warfare where everyone was equally doomed, or Renaissance warfare where the technology got deadlier but the medicine stayed medieval. Because honestly, both options make modern pregnancy complaints seem adorably trivial. Welcome to the Napoleonic era, where Europe decided that the previous centuries of warfare hadn't been quite ambitious enough, and it was time to turn the entire continent into one massive battlefield. Napoleon's grand tour of European destruction lasted from 1803 to 1815, and during this time, pregnant women got to experience the joys of giving birth, while armies marched back and forth across their villages like the world's deadliest parade. The Industrial Revolution was just beginning to make life slightly less miserable, but apparently nobody told the armies, who continued making everything infinitely worse with impressive efficiency. By the early 1800s, medical science had made some genuine progress. Doctors had figured out that washing hands might be useful, though most still considered this a radical theory. They discovered that bloodletting wasn't the cure for everything, though many continued using it out of professional habit, and some had even begun to suspect that women might know something about their own bodies, though this remained a controversial position in medical circles. Unfortunately, all of this barely theoretical progress meant absolutely nothing when cannonballs were flying overhead and armies were treating civilian populations like obstacles to be removed. The Peninsular War in Spain between 1808 and 1814 turned the entire Iberian Peninsula into a laboratory for studying how many different ways warfare could make childbirth impossible. Spanish women found themselves caught between French occupation forces who viewed civilians as resources to be exploited, British forces who viewed Spain as one giant military base, and Spanish guerrillas who turned every village into a potential battlefield. Pregnant women in this environment had to plan their deliveries around military movements, assuming they could predict when the next army would march through their town, burning everything in sight. French military hospitals during the Napoleonic Wars represented the cutting edge of early 19th century medicine, which is like saying they were the most advanced medieval torture chambers ever constructed. These facilities were designed by military engineers who understood fortification better than anatomy, staffed by surgeons whose primary experience was amputating limbs as quickly as possible, and supplied with medicines that were approximately 50% effective and 50% poison. When military wives or local women went into labor near these hospitals, they faced the choice between giving birth alone or receiving help from doctors whose idea of sterile technique was wiping their hands on slightly cleaner uniforms. The retreat from Moscow in 1812 provided pregnant women with perhaps the most spectacularly awful childbirth conditions in recorded history. French army wives and camp followers who had followed Napoleon's Grand Army into Russia now found themselves giving birth while fleeing across a frozen wasteland where the temperature regularly dropped below survival. These women delivered babies while walking through snow that was often knee-deep, with no shelter except what they could carry, no medical attention except what other refugees could provide, and no food except what they could scavenge from a landscape that had been systematically stripped bare by two retreating armies. Imagine trying to manage labor contractions while walking 20 miles a day through Russian winter. Imagine stopping to give birth on the side of a road where the previous night's snowfall had buried the bodies of soldiers who had frozen to death. Imagine wrapping a newborn in whatever fabric you could find while Cossack raiders circled like wolves waiting for stragglers. The mortality rates were so catastrophic that most of these births went unrecorded, partly because there was nobody left alive to record them, and partly because the entire experience was so traumatic that survivors preferred not to discuss it. But the Napoleonic Wars also introduced new industrial technologies that made warfare the more efficient at destroying everything, including pregnant women's chances of survival. Artillery had become more accurate and more mobile, which meant that no place was safe from bombardment. The famous flying artillery could appear anywhere and reduce buildings to rubble in minutes. Women who had carefully chosen hiding places for their labor suddenly found themselves giving birth in collapsed buildings, while cannonballs continued falling around them like metallic hail. The Continental System, Napoleon's economic warfare strategy, created artificial famines across Europe that made pregnancy itself a form of malnutrition. Women who were already struggling to find enough food to keep themselves alive had to somehow grow entire humans while their bodies slowly consumed themselves. When these malnourished women went into labor, they faced complications that would challenge modern hospitals, attended by midwives who were equally starved and working without any of the supplies that even medieval practitioners had taken for granted. Colonial warfare during this period added entirely new dimensions to wartime obstetric horrors. British women in India during the various wars and rebellions faced tropical diseases that European medicine didn't understand, in climates that European physiology couldn't handle, attended by medical practitioners whose training had prepared them for European diseases and European weather. When the Indian Rebellion of 1857 began, British women trapped in siege situations like Lucknow found themselves giving birth in compounds surrounded by enemies, with medical supplies running low and temperatures that made medieval siege conditions look comfortable. The siege of Lucknow lasted 87 days, during which British civilians, including pregnant women, were trapped in a residency compound while rebel forces controlled the surrounding city. Women went into labor in rooms that had been converted to hospitals, barracks, and ammunition storage simultaneously. They gave birth to the sound of musket fire and artillery bombardment, attended by military doctors whose primary patients were soldiers with gunshot wounds and tropical fevers. The heat was so intense that European women routinely suffered heat stroke, and pregnancy made them even more vulnerable to the climate that was already trying to kill them. But perhaps the most innovative horror of 19th century warfare was the development of more systematic approaches to civilian targeting. Military strategists had begun to understand that destroying civilian morale could be more effective than defeating armies in battle, which meant that pregnant women became legitimate military objectives. Sherman's March to the Sea during the American Civil War deliberately targeted civilian infrastructure and populations, leaving pregnant women in Georgia and South Carolina to give birth in the ruins of their communities while Union forces continued their systematic destruction. The American Civil War introduced industrial-scale warfare to a continent that had never experienced conflict on such a massive scale. Southern women found themselves giving birth while Union armies destroyed everything that could support the Confederate war effort, which included hospitals, medical supplies, and anyone with medical training. Northern women gave birth while their communities sent every able-bodied man to fight, leaving them with medical care provided by whoever was too old, too young, or too injured to carry a rifle. Civil War military medicine had advanced to the point where doctors could perform amputations without killing most of their patients, which was genuine progress compared to earlier periods. Unfortunately, obstetric care had not kept pace with military surgery, partly because army doctors were men whose medical training focused on treating other men, and partly because pregnant women were not considered a military priority unless they were married to officers. Most women giving birth during the Civil War received medical attention from other women whose qualifications consisted entirely of having survived their own pregnancies. The development of rifled firearms during this period made battlefields more lethal at longer ranges, which meant that the traditional safe distance from combat no longer existed. Women who had planned to give birth in towns that were supposedly far from the fighting suddenly found themselves in the middle of battles as armies maneuvered across larger territories with more deadly weapons. The Battle of Gettysburg turned the entire surrounding countryside into a combat zone, leaving local women to give birth while the largest battle in North American history raged around them. Photography during the Civil War documented these conditions for the first time in human history, though most photographers focused on dead soldiers rather than living women struggling to bring life into the world amid such massive death. The few images that survive show women and children in refugee camps that looked like medieval plague settlements, living in conditions that made the Renaissance army camps look luxurious. Drop a comment below about which period you think had it worse: medieval women who expected everything to be terrible, Renaissance women who thought things might be improving, or 19th century women who were watching modern technology make ancient problems deadlier. Because honestly, each era found new ways to make the impossible situation of wartime childbirth even more impossible. And now, we arrive at the 20th century, where humanity finally perfected the art of making war so comprehensively destructive that it could kill everyone everywhere all at once. The world wars brought us mechanized death on an industrial scale, poison gas that could melt your lungs, and bombing campaigns that turned entire cities into crematoriums. But here's the plot twist. For the first time in human history, medical science was actually starting to catch up with humanity's infinite creativity for destruction. Unfortunately, being slightly less likely to die in childbirth doesn't mean much when entire civilizations are trying to murder each other with scientific precision. World War I introduced the concept of total war to a generation that thought warfare was still about gentlemen soldiers having polite disagreements with rifles. Suddenly, entire nations became battlefields, and pregnant women found themselves giving birth while poison gas drifted across the countryside and artillery shells fell like mechanical rain. The Western Front turned huge swaths of France and Belgium into moonscapes of craters and corpses, but French and Belgian women still had to give birth somewhere, even if that somewhere looked like the surface of a dead planet. The siege of Leningrad during World War II represents perhaps the absolute pinnacle of wartime birth horror in all of human history. For 872 days, from 1941 to 1944, the city was completely surrounded by German forces who were trying to starve every living person inside to death. Women who became pregnant during the siege faced the choice between bringing children into a world where people were eating wallpaper paste and leather shoes, or terminating pregnancies while they themselves were slowly dying of starvation. Those who chose to carry pregnancies to term gave birth to babies who were already dying before they took their first breath. Leningrad maternity hospitals during the siege operated without heat, electricity, or adequate food for the staff, let alone the patients. Doctors performed deliveries by candlelight in operating rooms where the temperature was often below freezing. Newborn babies were wrapped in whatever fabric could be found, which often meant paper or clothes stripped from corpses. The infant mortality rate reached nearly 100%, not because of medical incompetence, but because it's impossible to keep babies alive when there's literally no food to feed their mothers. But here's where 20th century warfare got really creative with its approach to tormenting pregnant women. The London Blitz turned pregnancy into a scheduling challenge around German bombing raids. British women learned to time their contractions around air raid sirens, giving birth in underground stations that had been converted into bomb shelters. Picture trying to push out a baby while V-2 rockets exploded overhead and thousands of strangers huddled around you in tunnels that smelled like fear, urine, and unwashed humanity. The underground maternity wards were marvels of British improvisation and stubbornness. Women gave birth on platforms where trains had run just hours before, attended by doctors who had been pulled from their practices to serve as emergency obstetricians in conditions they had never trained for. The constant noise of bombing, anti-aircraft guns, and air raid sirens created a soundtrack of apocalypse that accompanied every birth. Babies born during the Blitz literally entered the world to the sound of civilization trying to destroy itself. Japanese women during World War II faced their own special category of wartime birth trauma. The American firebombing campaign turned Japanese cities into infernos that burned so hot they created their own weather systems. Women went into labor in air raid shelters while their cities literally melted around them. The bombing of Tokyo in March 1945 created temperatures of over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt concrete and boil rivers. Women who survived gave birth in a landscape that looked like the aftermath of volcanic eruptions, attended by midwives whose medical supplies had been incinerated along with everything else. But the 20th century also brought genuine medical advances that, for the first time in human history, gave pregnant women a fighting chance even during wartime. Antibiotics meant that infections that had killed women for millennia could now be treated, assuming anyone could find antibiotics during a global war. Anesthesia made labor bearable, assuming hospitals had electricity and trained anesthesiologists who hadn't been drafted. Blood transfusions could save women from hemorrhaging, assuming blood banks existed and hadn't been bombed. Military hospitals during World War II represented the peak of wartime medical care, which finally meant something more than medieval prayers with slightly better tools. Army doctors had learned to treat trauma, infection, and blood loss with techniques that would have seemed like magic to previous generations. Unfortunately, most of these advances focused on keeping soldiers alive long enough to return to combat, and obstetric care remained a low priority until victory was achieved, and nations could afford to care about civilian women again. The Holocaust added dimensions of horror to wartime pregnancy that had never existed before in human history. Jewish women in ghettos and concentration camps faced systematic starvation, medical experimentation, and deliberate policies designed to prevent Jewish births. Those who became pregnant in these conditions gave birth in secret, often killing their newborns immediately to prevent discovery by guards who would murder both mother and child. The few babies who survived were hidden by other prisoners in conditions that made medieval dungeons look comfortable. Dr. Josef Mengele's medical experiments on pregnant women at Auschwitz represent the absolute nadir of human evil applied to obstetric care. Women were subjected to procedures that cannot be described in any civilized discussion, all in the name of Nazi racial science that was even more scientifically worthless than medieval astrology. These weren't births, they were systematic torture disguised as medical research, conducted by doctors who had abandoned every principle of medical ethics in service of an ideology that treated human reproduction as a problem to be solved through industrial murder. Soviet women during the siege of Stalingrad gave birth in rubble that had once been hospitals, schools, and homes. The city had been reduced to individual buildings held by small groups of soldiers, with civilians trapped in basements and sewers. Women went into labor in conditions that made trench warfare look spacious, attended by anyone who happened to be nearby and wasn't actively shooting at Germans. The city had no electricity, no running water, and no medical supplies beyond what could be scavenged from the ruins of the previous civilization. Korean War maternity care represented a strange fusion of cutting-edge military medicine and Bronze Age living conditions. American field hospitals could perform surgery that would have amazed World War II doctors, but Korean civilians still lived in conditions that hadn't changed much since the medieval period. Women gave birth in military hospitals that had antibiotics, blood banks, and X-ray machines, but these facilities were designed for treating combat casualties, not delivering babies. Most Korean women still gave birth at home, which often meant in refugee camps or bombed-out buildings. The Vietnam War introduced helicopter medical evacuation to combat medicine, which meant that wounded soldiers could receive treatment within minutes of being injured. Unfortunately, pregnant Vietnamese women didn't qualify for helicopter evacuation unless they were married to American soldiers, which left them giving birth in villages that were being systematically destroyed by defoliation, bombing, and artillery. Fire. Agent Orange turned entire regions into chemical wastelands where pregnancy itself became a form of environmental poisoning. But perhaps the most modern innovation in wartime obstetrics was the development of mobile military hospitals that could provide genuine medical care in combat zones. MASH units during the Korean War could perform surgery, manage infections, and provide anesthesia in conditions that would have challenged permanent hospitals. For the first time in human history, women giving birth during wartime had access to medical care that was actually better than what most civilians, women had received throughout most of history. Modern warfare has finally reached the point where the medical care available during wartime can be better than civilian care during peacetime, assuming you can reach the medical care and avoid being killed by all the military technology that has. Also advanced, 21st century military medicine can perform miracles that would have seemed like divine intervention to previous generations. But 21st century weapons can destroy entire civilizations in ways that medieval armies couldn't have imagined, in their wildest nightmares. So here we are at the end of our journey through the history of wartime childbirth. From medieval sieges to modern conflicts, we've seen humanity's infinite creativity for making war, matched only by women's infinite determination to bring life into the world, regardless of how hard everyone else was trying to destroy it. The technology has changed, the medicine has improved, and the weapons have become more efficient, but the basic equation remains the same. When civilizations decide to murder each other, pregnant women pay the price while somehow managing to keep the human species going. Tell me in the comments which era you think finally got it right, or if you think we're still figuring out how to be human beings instead of sophisticated apes with nuclear weapons. Because honestly, after this historical tour, I'm not sure our species deserves to survive, but somehow women keep making sure we do anyway.